20. Disturbing true stories of Texas's most haunted roads. Texas roads aren't just highways. They're haunted paths filled with whispers, shadows, and ghosts. Most viewers leave without subscribing. Don't make that mistake. Hit subscribe and join the darkness. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Comment below. The night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. I was heading out of Wimberley late one night, taking Ranch Road 32 toward Blanco, the stretch of highway locals call the Devil's Backbone. If you've never been there, it's a long, high ridge of limestone, twisting with sharp curves and drop-offs on either side. In the daylight, it can look beautiful, all mesquite and cedar and the rolling hill country spread out beneath you. But at night, it has a different kind of presence. The kind of silence where you realize how far you are from help if something goes wrong. It was close to midnight, cool for a Texas spring, and the mist had started to crawl up from the low valleys, giving the ridge this hazy, dreamlike edge. I had the windows cracked open, breathing in cedar and dust, letting the truck climb the incline with the engine's hum the only steady sound. I'd heard stories about this road my whole life. The backbone was supposed to be haunted. Settlers massacred, bandits executed, ranch hands killed in accidents, you name it. Every kid in the area had some tale of seeing riders without heads or phantom wagons rattling across the caliche. My father used to say the place was a graveyard with a highway poured right over the bones. I didn't really believe all that. But that night I had that prickly feeling you get when your instincts tell you something is watching. The first time I noticed the lights, I thought it was just another car. Two faint blue glows in my mirror, spaced apart like headlights but softer, dimmer. They shimmered instead of cutting through the darkness, and for a moment I wondered if someone had tinted their beams. But then I realized the lights weren't steady, they were floating. Sometimes they rose up above the guardrail, drifting higher than a car's lights ever could, and then they dipped so low they skimmed the pavement. I blinked, leaned forward on the wheel, and they were still there, pacing me. I told myself it was just fatigue. Maybe it was glare from the dash or a reflection on the glass. I wiped at the mirror, but the lights only burned clearer, flickering, like they were alive. I tapped my brakes, expecting the car behind me to slow. Instead, the lights surged forward, drawing close enough that the whole inside of my cab glowed with a sickly blue haze. I couldn't see any shape behind them. No hood, no grille, no shadow of a driver. Just orbs, the color of gas flames, hanging in the mist. I rolled down the window further, half thinking I'd hear an engine or tires on the pavement, but there was nothing. No hum, no gravel spray, not even the wind. My truck might as well have been floating in a vacuum, those lights swimming right behind me like eyes in the dark. I pressed harder on the gas, feeling the tires bite into the road. The lights kept up. They matched me curve for curve, through every winding switchback, steady as a hunter's aim. When I hit the straightaway near the overlook, I slammed the pedal down. The truck roared up past 70, 75, 80. The ridge blurred by cedar branches flashing silver in my high beams. But those orbs didn't shrink. If anything, they were closer now, darting side to side, almost playful. One slipped ahead, glowing just off my left fender, then shot across my hood so fast I nearly swerved off the edge. It wasn't until my headlights flickered, just a little, pop in the wiring, an old truck quirk, that the blue lights vanished. They didn't fade. They just winked out like someone had flipped a switch. My hands were locked on the wheel, knuckles bone white. The road in front of me stretched empty, the mist curling like smoke over the limestone. I kept waiting for the orbs to return, but for a long while the only light was my own beams cutting the dark. Then, in the reflection of the passenger window, I saw them again. Two faint blue smudges drifting just above the glass, as if they were inside with me. I jerked my head around, but the cab was empty. Empty except for that smell. It wasn't cedar or dust anymore. It was something sharp, like ozone before a lightning strike, and under that, a wet, coppery tang. The kind of scent that makes your stomach turn and your brain whisper blood. I forced the window shut, choking on the air, but the smell lingered. My chest tightened, and the truck engine gave this sick cough, like it was struggling to breathe with me. I came around another curve, and there was a pickup parked sideways across the shoulder. Hazard lights dead. Hood popped like it had quit. I swerved around it, horn blaring, and in that instant I saw a man standing by the grill. Or I thought it was a man. His body glowed the same impossible blue, his face hollow where the features should have been, and his arms reached out as if to flag me down. Only his hands didn't move natural. They stretched too long, bones bending the wrong way, like someone had pulled him apart and snapped him back together wrong. I didn't stop. I didn't even think about it. I kept the wheel straight and prayed the engine would hold. My headlights buzzed again, dimmed for a split second, and the figure dissolved into the mist. By the time I looked back, the truck was gone too. No flashers, no hood, no man, just empty shoulder and guardrail. I don't remember the rest of the drive. Somehow I made it to Blanco, parked outside a 24-hour diner and sat in the cab until sunrise. When I finally looked at the back of my truck, the tailgate was covered in handprints. Dozens of them, smeared into the dust, each one glowing, faintly blue in the morning light. I've never taken the backbone at night again. Locals still talk about the orbs, the blue fires that chase your car until your headlights blink them away. Some say they're spirits of settlers killed on the ridge. Others say they're the souls of soldiers still marching blind in the dark. I don't know what I saw. All I know is when my lights flickered, I was given mercy, and maybe the next driver won't be. FM 66 runs like a scar through the brush country outside Banquette, a 2-lane strip of asphalt the locals call the Bishop Road, though no one remembers why. I had driven it plenty of times in daylight, the mesquite shadows stretching over the bar ditches, buzzards circling over the fields, heat shimmering above the blacktop. But at night it was another place entirely. You'd see a ranch gate here and there, but most of the land was just scrub and silence, broken up by the occasional barbed wire fence or half-collapsed windmill. I never liked driving it after midnight, but sometimes work left me no choice. This particular night it was exactly 3:33 in the morning when it happened. I know because I glanced at the dashboard clock just before I saw the movement. I was heading south out of Banquette, coffee keeping me awake, radio low so the static wouldn't lull me to sleep. There wasn't another headlight in sight, not ahead or behind, just me and that long ribbon of road. I drove past the old mission-style gas station, boarded up since the 70s, and that's when I heard something hit the roof of the truck, like a rock or maybe a branch, though there weren't any trees close enough. My heart jumped into my throat, but I kept driving, telling myself it was nothing. Then, without warning, the little brass crucifix hanging from my rearview mirror snapped free as if something had yanked it down. The chain didn't break. The clasp didn't come loose. It was torn straight off and clattered into the passenger seat. I swear on my life, I hadn't touched it. The wheel jerked under my hands at the same time, like someone invisible grabbed it. I corrected hard, tires skidding, gravel spitting, barely keeping the truck on the pavement. My coffee tipped and sloshed across the floorboard. I swore out loud, chest pounding. For a second I considered turning around, but the nearest light in either direction was miles away, and the thought of stopping made my stomach twist. I kept driving, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the beams of my headlights, cutting through the brush. Not a minute later I saw the glow ahead. It wasn't headlights, more like the faint orange flicker of a candle. As I came closer, I realized it was lining both sides of the road. A dozen, maybe 2 dozen small flames, like votive candles set right on the asphalt's edge. They weren't there a second ago. The wind had picked up, rustling the mesquite, but the flames didn't flicker, didn't move. They burned steady, as if shielded by glass, though I could see they weren't. I slowed, unwilling to stop, and drove through them. The air smelled thick, not of wax, but of something sour, metallic. Blood. I don't know how else to say it. Once past them, I glanced in the mirror and saw only darkness. The candles were gone. That's when the radio cut out. Not static, just silence, like someone had unplugged it. A few seconds later, a voice came through, faint, whispering in Spanish, though I couldn't make out the words. My grandmama used to tell me stories about La Carretera del Diablo, the Devil's Road, and how souls lost in accidents there never rested. I hadn't thought of those stories in years, but in that moment, they came rushing back. Up ahead, I noticed a shape lying across the road. It looked like a deer at first, its legs bent awkwardly, head tilted. I eased off the gas, ready to swerve around it, but as my headlights washed over, I saw it wasn't a deer at all. It was a man, pale, bloated, dressed in what looked like a black cassock, the kind a priest would wear, though it was shredded and soaked with something dark. His arms were crossed over his chest, and in his hands he clutched a wooden cross, splintered down the middle. My truck slowed to a crawl, and as I passed, his head turned. His eyes opened, glowing faint yellow, and his lips moved. I didn't hear words, just a hiss like air escaping from a tire. Then his mouth split wider and wider until it stretched impossibly, and he screamed without sound. I floored it. The speedometer needle climbed, and I kept my eyes locked on the road, refusing to look back. But the smell followed, that thick metallic rot. My crucifix was still lying in the seat beside me, and it was hot to the touch, almost burning. The whispers on the radio grew louder, overlapping voices now, male and female, some laughing, some crying. I couldn't tell if they were praying or cursing, maybe both. I don't remember how long I drove before I saw the lights of Bishop in the distance. When I finally reached town, the radio crackled back to normal, and the crucifix cooled in my palm. I pulled into a gas station, cut the engine, and just sat there shaking. I checked the time again. It was still 3:33. The next morning I told a friend about it, half expecting him to laugh. He didn't. He told me his uncle had died on that stretch years ago, a head-on collision with a drunk driver. Said they found his rosary beads wrapped tight around the gear shift, like he'd been clutching them when he saw the headlights coming. People say every cross you see nailed to the fence posts along FM 666 marks someone who never left. He said sometimes if you drive there late enough, you'll see them standing on the shoulder waiting for rides. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. But some nights, when the house is quiet, I wake up at exactly 3:33, and I swear I hear that whisper again, sliding through the static of the world, calling me back to that road. Possum Kingdom Lake sits heavy in the heart of Palo Pinto County, a deep blue body of water ringed by limestone bluffs and crooked cedar. Folks come for the fishing in the cabins, the tubing and the wake boats, and if you catch it on a summer afternoon with the sun on the water and kids laughing on the docks, you'd think it was as wholesome as a postcard. But I grew up near Grayford, and I'll tell you, when the air is still at night and the lake turns black under a hung moon, you can hear things roll across that water that don't belong to any living throat. They say the screams ride in from Possum Kingdom Holler, carried on the breeze like a voice through a long, invisible horn, and once you've heard them, you'll never mistake it for anything else. I didn't believe it for most of my life. My uncle used to spin stories about the holler like he was trying to spook me before bed, about riders who drowned there during a storm back in the 40s, about bootleggers whose horses went down in quicksand, about girls who vanished along Park Road 36. I always thought it was small-town gossip inflated into a ghost story, until the summer of 2012 when I was 23, working nights at a feed mill in Mineral Wells and crashing at my cousin Rick's lake cabin on weekends. That was the summer I learned the truth, and the sound still rides in my ears when the cicadas die down and the air goes quiet. It was late June, hot enough to make the air stick, the kind of heat where even the breeze feels like it's pushing from an open oven. Rick had a little 2-bedroom cabin off Park Road 36, one of those boxy wood structures patched together with siding that never quite matched. He'd invited a handful of us out to celebrate his birthday. Me, my girlfriend at the time, a guy named Caleb, who worked with him at the oil field, and 2 of Rick's old high school buddies. We grilled burgers, drank too much cheap whiskey, and by 10 that night, the bugs were rattling loud enough to drown out conversation unless you were shouting. Rick suggested we take the boat out, let the heat roll off us in the breeze over the water. So we piled into his little bass boat, 6 of us, a cooler rattling around between our feet, and pushed off into the dark. Out there the air grew cooler and the sky stretched wide, clear except for a smear of clouds hugging the horizon. You could see the lights from cabins and marinas dotting the shoreline like match heads. We killed the motor about half a mile out, cracked open more drinks, and let the boat drift. It was peaceful in that way Texas nights sometimes are. when the land exhales and everything just seems to wait. Then it came. A sound that didn't seem like it could travel across water, but it did. Thin at first, like a woman crying out in pain, then stretched and doubled, and then another joined it until it was a chorus of screams riding the air. We all froze. Caleb dropped his can into the hull and muttered, "What the hell is that?" Rick laughed nervously and said, "That's the holler, old wives' tale. They say it's ghosts, but it's probably just coyotes or something. But coyotes don't scream like that. Coyotes rise and fall, their howls scatter and echo. This was different. This was sharp, raw, human. A pain so full it set the hair prickling on my arms. My girlfriend clutched my wrist and whispered, "That's people." She wasn't wrong. It was people, or had been once. The sound carried across the water, lingering, sometimes cutting off abruptly like a throat choked closed, sometimes trailing, off into whimpers that left silence heavier than before. I could feel it in my teeth like the vibrations worked through the bones in my head. Nobody spoke for a while. Even Rick, drunk and trying to keep things light, sat there staring into the black. The screams ebbed after maybe 3 minutes, but it felt longer. The cicadas picked up again. Someone finally laughed, brittle and forced, and the spell broke, but we were all quieter after that. We should have headed in, but Rick was stubborn. He wanted to prove it was nothing, that it was just some animal. He steered us toward the eastern bank where the limestone bluffs fell into the lake. The boat's headlight caught on a sheer face of rock and the jagged silhouette of cedar and oak. The wind had died completely. Our voices carried too clearly like we were speaking inside a cave. And then we saw it. Something pale flickering along the shore, just past the trees. It wasn't a steady light, more like the glint of moonlight on wet skin. Caleb pointed and shouted, "There! You see that?" But when we swung the boat closer, there was nothing. Just water lapping against the rocks. We cut the motor again. That was a mistake. The silence settled in thick, broken only by the faint slosh against the hull. Then we heard a sound closer than before. Not a scream this time, but the rhythmic clop of hooves, like a horse walking a hard dirt road. But it was wrong. It was coming from the water, circling us, steady and deliberate. My girlfriend started crying, whispering, "No, no, no," over and over. Rick's friend tried to start the motor, but the pull cord snapped in his hand like rotten twine. He cursed, tried again and again, but nothing caught. The hoofbeats grew louder, circling tighter, until they seemed just under the boat. Then came the screams again all around us, not distant now but close. So close it was like they were rising from the water beneath our feet. I swear I felt the hull lift, just a fraction, like something had brushed against the underside. I leaned over, desperate, stupid, trying to see, and in the faint reflection of the moonlight I saw faces, half-formed, mouths wide, eyes hollow, riding just below the surface, their screams bubbling into the night. I lurched back, nearly toppling the boat. My girlfriend clawed at my arm. Caleb was cursing, Rick was shouting at the motor, and then, just as sudden as it came, it all stopped. No screams, no hoofbeats, just silence again. The motor coughed to life on the next pull, like nothing had been wrong at all. Nobody argued when Rick turned the boat back toward the cabin at full throttle. We didn't speak. We didn't even look at one another. When we reached the dock, we climbed out and stumbled into the cabin, dripping sweat, smelling like fear. Rick tried to pour another round of whiskey, but his hands were shaking too badly. We ended up sleeping on couches and floors, all the lights left on. In the morning, it was almost easy to convince ourselves it had been drink and nerves, the lake playing tricks on us. But when I stepped onto the dock to splash my face with lake water, I saw something caught in the reeds. It was an old horseshoe, rusted, the nails bent inward like they'd been torn out of a hoof. I left it there. We all did. Nobody mentioned it, and when I packed up to leave later that day, I knew I wouldn't be back. I moved out of Palo Pinto County later that year, and I haven't set foot near Possum Kingdom since. But on still nights when the air outside my window goes dead quiet, I swear I catch it again. the faint edge of a scream carried in the dark, as if the lake had followed. Me, as if the riders are still circling, waiting for another boat to cut its motor and listen. Goatman's Crossing sits in that part of Denton County where the trees close in heavy, and the air feels thicker than it ought to, especially at night. I first heard about the place from my cousin Wes back in the summer of 1998, when I'd gone up to visit him for a week. We were teenagers then, and teenagers in North Texas will do anything to make the night feel longer, scarier, more alive. Old Alton Bridge had that reputation already, even before the stories got mixed with dares. Supposedly a man with the head of a goat prowled the bridge after dark, scratching up cars with horns nobody could see coming. People swore they'd heard hooves clattering across asphalt when no animals were around, or found fresh gouges on their doors that hadn't been there before. A lot of it sounded like bored kids or drunk college types from UNT making up stories. Still, when Wes suggested we drive out there one night, the way he said it made me think he wasn't joking around. The road to the bridge wasn't much to look at in daylight, just a strip of two-lane asphalt slipping into thick trees that seemed older than the county itself. But at night, it had a different feel. The headlights swallowed whole patches of black and threw back just enough to see the overgrown brush, the crooked barbed wire fences sagging with rust. Cicadas and crickets made the air sound like it was sizzling. We rolled down the windows, and it smelled like cedar and dust, sharp and dry. Neither of us talked much. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up the closer we got. The bridge itself was iron, old red metal with bolts that looked like they could give out any second. The locals called it Goatman's Crossing, but its real name was Old Alton Bridge, a relic from when wagons still crossed the Trinity River. We parked just before it, the headlights sweeping across the skeletal trusses, painting shadows that stretched back into the trees. The sound of the engine cutting off made the night deeper, almost unbearable in its quiet. The only thing louder than the cicadas was my own heartbeat. Wes leaned back, grinning like he wanted to hide his nerves. They say if you knock 3 times on the bridge at midnight, he shows up, scratches your car, sometimes worse. He said it in that half-serious tone, but his eyes never left the metal frame. We sat there, both of us staring at the bridge, letting the minutes tick by. At some point, Wes pulled out his lighter and flicked it, the tiny flame catching his face. He looked pale. "You hear that?" he whispered. At first I thought he was messing with me, but then I caught it too. Something faint, almost too faint to tell apart from the wind. A dragging sound like hooves across gravel. It came from the direction of the bridge. My stomach clenched tight. Wes grinned nervously. "Let's do it." He shoved open his door, and the sound of his sneakers crunching dirt seemed too loud. I followed him, though every part of me screamed not to. We walked onto the bridge. The iron creaked under us, groaning like it didn't want us there. The Trinity below was black and sluggish, reflecting nothing. When we reached the middle, Wes knelt and knocked on the metal 3 times. The sound rang out and echoed down into the trees. We waited. The cicadas quieted like something had hushed them all at once. The air turned still. My ears strained and caught another sound. The faint clop of hooves, deliberate, slow, moving closer. But the bridge was empty. I glanced at Wes, and he was staring at the end of the bridge, his face pale. His lips formed the word "look." I turned my head. At first it seemed like nothing, just the dark swallowing the road. Then 2 shapes rose out of it. Horns, curved and sharp, catching what little starlight there was. They moved, like something taller than a man was lowering its head and scraping it along the air. A sound like metal on metal rang out as if those horns were dragging against the beams of the bridge. I could see nothing of the body, just those horns floating like shadows with weight. Something scraped across the hood of Wes's car back on the road, the sound unmistakable. Long, slow scratches, tearing into paint. Then another clop of hooves, closer this time, on the steel grating beneath us. We both backed up, stumbling over each other. The horns dipped low, and I swear I felt the air move, a hot animal breath brushing against my cheek. We bolted, running so hard my chest ached, jumping back into the car. Wes turned the key and the engine roared to life just as something slammed into the side panel. The car jolted, skidding sideways. He hit the gas and we tore down the road, gravel spitting behind us. In the side mirror, the horn skimmed the hood one last time, leaving a fresh set of scratches that gleamed silver in the reflection, before vanishing into the dark. We didn't stop until we hit Denton, parked under the orange glow of a gas station. The attendant gave us a look when we stumbled inside, sweating, pale, out of breath. We grabbed sodas just to have something to do with our hands. Neither of us spoke until we got back outside. The car door had 3 jagged scratches running down it, deep enough you could feel the grooves. Wes touched them like he couldn't believe they were real. "How do you explain that?" he whispered. I didn't. Neither of us ever did. The car was totaled a year later in a wreck, but he kept that panel in his dad's barn for years, like proof. Even then, nobody believed us when we told it. But I'll never forget that night. The way the cicadas went silent, the sound of hooves on steel, or the horns that floated like shadows, carving into metal with no body to cast them. And sometimes even now when I drive alone down a Texas backroad, I swear I see scratches on my hood that weren't there before. FM4 through the Palo Pinto Mountains isn't the kind of road you take by accident. It winds like a drunken snake, all blind turns and steep grades, switchbacks cut into brittle limestone cliffs that drop off into black cedar valleys. The first time I drove it at night was on a late run back from a friend's ranch outside Strawn. The air was heavy, still holding on to the heat of the day, and I remember how my headlights kept carving open slices of brush and rock, only for the dark to swallow them whole again. Out there you don't get cell service, and the FM roads can feel like they stretch into nowhere. You're hemmed in by shadows that press against the glass, and even though you're just a few miles from civilization, it feels like a different world. About halfway down a stretch called Red Switchbacks, a name I never knew the origin of but always heard locals say with a shake of the head, I spotted something odd near a guardrail. I almost didn't believe my eyes. It wasn't an animal or a car. It was boot prints, fresh ones. They stood out in the dust as if someone had just stepped there, heavy and sharp. I pulled over without really thinking, curiosity winning over common sense, and left the truck idling as I swung my door open. The prints went right up to the guardrail and then beyond it, as if someone had climbed over and kept walking into the void. But there's no ground past that rail, just a sheer drop of 200 feet into cedar and scrub and stone. Nobody could survive it, not in daylight and especially not at night. I remember leaning over the rail, the crickets pulsing in the brush below, and seeing nothing but blackness. No movement, no flashlight beam, no distant sound of someone scrambling down. Just silence so heavy it made my ears ring. When I turned back toward the prints, I realized something else. There were no approach tracks. The first mark started at the rail itself, pressed into the dirt like a boot had materialized there. That sent a chill down my spine so fast I had to grip the rail for balance. I got back in my truck, shut the door, and locked it, which felt ridiculous but necessary. As I idled there, I noticed in the mirror that the dust had shifted. Another print had appeared one step closer to the truck. I whipped around, headlights flooding the shoulder, but there was nothing. No figure. Just another single mark pressed into the roadside dirt that hadn't been there a minute earlier. My scalp prickled, every nerve tightening, and I floored it out of there, tires spitting gravel as I hugged the next curve too fast. The road coiled tighter as I descended, switchbacks stacked like some cruel mountain joke. At one point I thought I'd lost my bearings because the same stretch of road appeared again. The same scarred cedar tree bent like an old man. The same spray-painted Jesus Saves on the guardrail. I told myself it was just repetition of scenery, easy to mix up on winding roads, but when I glanced at the dirt shoulder, my stomach dropped. The prints were there again, only this time strung out in a row, keeping pace with me. 5 or 6, boots pressed into dust, each angled toward the lane as if whoever, or whatever, made them had been walking alongside the truck the entire way. I drove faster, the mountain pressing in, headlights fighting back the dark. The wheel shuddered in my hands as I hit another tight turn, and that was when I saw him. Just a flicker, but enough. A figure standing on the rail, balanced as easy as a bird, right where the drop yawned open. He was tall, shoulders squared, a brimmed hat shadowing his face, and before I could process what I was looking at, he stepped forward into empty air. My stomach clenched as I braked, tires screaming, and the truck fishtailed onto the shoulder. When I craned to look, there was nothing below, no impact, just the prints fresh and solitary leading right up to where he'd stepped off. I didn't linger. I hammered the accelerator, white-knuckled, until I saw the glow of a gas station sign near Palo Pinto proper. Even under its buzzing fluorescent lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something down the mountain with me. Dust clung to my tires in patterns that looked too much like footprints. When I got out to stretch, I swear I heard the crunch of gravel behind me, slow and deliberate, though the lot was empty. That was 2 years ago. I never drove red switchbacks again. But here's the thing. Sometimes I still find boot prints outside my place. Not every night, not even every week. Just often enough to keep me awake, wondering if one day I'll wake up and find a line of them starting at my bedroom door. State Highway 16 between Bandera and Kerrville isn't the sort of road you drive for pleasure after dark. Not unless you were born there or had a reason to be out. The curves are sharp, shoulders narrow, and the hill country has a way of swallowing sound. I grew up around Bandera, and like most kids there, I'd heard the stories before I could drive. The siren with no car. You'd be heading north toward Kerrville and somewhere after Medina. Usually when the mesquite shadows got thick across the pavement, you'd hear it start behind you. Not loud at first, just a thin wail that carried in from far away. You'd check your rear view expecting headlights, but the road stayed empty. It would follow you though, mile after mile, climbing in pitch until it pressed at your teeth and temples. They said it only stopped when the first light of dawn touched the hills. I used to laugh it off. The sort of campfire tale people tell to keep kids from sneaking out at night. Then, in the summer of 2004, when I was 21 and working nights at a feed store in Kerrville, I found myself alone on that stretch of 16 well after midnight. I was in my old Ford Ranger, windows down because the AC had long since died, and the night air smelled like cedar and hot asphalt. The radio barely pulled in anything but static. I'd had a long shift, stacking bags in the back, and I just wanted to get home. Somewhere past Bandera Falls, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the normal country quiet, but something deeper, pressed down. The insects had gone silent. Even the cicadas, which had been screaming all week in the heat, had stopped. That was when I caught the first thread of it, a distant, rising wail, faint as wind through a bottle. My hand went for the mirror before I realized I'd already slowed. Headlights didn't show. Nothing but blacktop curving through mesquite and limestone. I told myself it was someone far off, maybe on a 173, the other highway that ran through Medina. But when I eased back to 60 and kept driving, the sound came, with me. Not closer, not fading, just there, steady like it was tied to my truck. I cracked the windows higher, thinking maybe it was wind catching somewhere on the cab. But the pitch was too true, too perfect. A siren. The hill country has its own kind of darkness, the kind that feels alive. The stars were out, but the road, bent between ridges, and more than once I felt like I was driving through the bottom of a dry riverbed. Every time the road dipped, the sound seemed to catch on the rocks and echo, swelling like it had a throat of its own. By the time I passed Medina Lake turnoff, my nerves were raw. I kept catching myself checking the rear view, half expecting a cruiser to blaze up behind me. But the glass only showed the ribbon of asphalt unspooling, nothing else. At one point, I pulled over, just stopped dead at the shoulder and cut the engine. My headlights beamed into a patch of brush, catching the pale shine of limestone. Crickets chirped faintly like they were daring to come back. For half a second I thought I'd imagined it. Then the siren rose up again, starting thin, swelling, into a high keen that filled the cab even though the truck wasn't running. I swear I felt it in my chest like pressure. I sat there gripping the wheel, engine off, key dangling, watching the mirror. My own headlights threw enough glow behind me to light up the guardrail. Nothing moved. No dust, no tires, no red and blues. Just the noise, howling like it was about to crest. Then, just as fast, it dropped out. Not like fading away, but cut, like someone killed the switch. The silence after was worse than the sound. I don't know what made me start the truck again, but I did, and I kept going. Past Pipe Creek, past the curve by the old quarry. That's where it came back, sharper, this time. Not behind me, but around me, like the air itself had become a siren. My rear view wavered as though heat shimmered across it, and for the first time I thought I saw something in the distance. A flicker, pale, not headlights, not taillights either, like reflections off glass, floating. I blinked and it was gone, but the sound dug in. Every hair on my arms was stiff and my jaw clenched until my molars hurt. I tried the radio, spun the dial, but all I got was more wailing, every station bleeding into the same pitch. When I smacked the dash, the speakers popped, but the noise didn't stop. I was sweating by the time the road narrowed through the hills south of Kerrville. That stretch has no shoulders, just rock face on one side, drop on the other. I kept waiting for lights, for anything to explain it, but it was only me, the Ford, and that endless siren. At one point I rolled down the passenger window and leaned toward the outside, hoping it was some trick of resonance. The night air hit me full of cedar pollen and dust, but the siren was louder there, clawing into my ear. It carried me all the way until the faint orange glow of Kerrville showed. Just before the first gas station on the edge of town, it cut off. Clean gone like someone flipped a breaker. The cicadas rushed back all at once and I nearly drove into the ditch from the shock of sound. I pulled in at the All Soups and sat shaking, my hands welded to the wheel. I didn't tell anyone that night, but the next morning when I mentioned the drive to an older guy at work, he didn't even let me finish, just nodded slow and said, "You made it past dawn, that's why." When I pressed, he told me about his cousin, a deputy back in the 70s, who'd chased what he thought was a drunk on 16. Said the siren dragged him all the way into the hills, never catching up, until sun came over and the noise vanished. The deputy quit not long after. "Road keeps things," the old man said, "and sometimes they ride you till morning." I never doubted again. In the years since, I've only had to take that road after dark twice, and both times I kept the windows down, praying to hear crickets. The truth is, once you've heard the siren with no car, you know it isn't about tickets or warnings. It's about being claimed for a while. Some say if you stop long enough, it'll climb inside and you won't see dawn at all. I don't know if that part's true, but I can tell you this. To this day, every time I drive a lonely stretch and hear even a hint of wind through the trees, my foot eases off the gas and my eyes go to the mirror. Because out there on Highway 16, sometimes the law that's following you isn't the kind that carries a badge. The wind out there cuts like a knife. It has a way of finding its way into your coat, under your shirt, against your ribs, like it knows exactly where you're weakest. That stretch of US 62 to 180 where it cuts through the Guadalupe Mountains is bad enough in daylight, but at night it's another thing entirely. You've got ridges and cliffs black as coal rising on both sides, the occasional dry gulch yawning out into the desert, and a road that seems to go on forever without another set of headlights to break the dark. The mountains lean over you, ancient and jagged, and the desert spreads out flat on the other side, wide and empty as a graveyard. People talk about ghosts in houses, in graveyards, in old churches, but out there the ghosts don't need walls. They have all the space in the world and nowhere better to be. I was making the drive late one night headed west out of Carlsbad, and I remember thinking I had made a mistake leaving that late. The road is 2 lanes in most stretches, and you can go 100 miles without seeing a single gas station lit up. It was cold, dry, and the air smelled faintly of dust and juniper. The sky was clear but moonless, a hard black dome with more stars than I'd ever seen back home. It should have been beautiful, but it felt wrong somehow, like being watched. Like those stars weren't far-off suns, but 1,000 cold eyes peering down at me. That's when I saw it. At first it was just a flicker of orange-yellow out in the dark about 200 yards ahead on the shoulder of the road. My first thought was a campfire, but it was too small and too steady for that. Then, as I got closer, I realized it wasn't fire at all. It was a lantern, the old kind made of tin and glass, the kind you'd picture in the hands of a railroad worker or a ranch hand from a century ago, and someone was carrying it. The figure was walking against the wind, which was strange because the gusts were strong enough to stagger me even behind the wheel. The flame inside the lantern never wavered. I slowed as I passed, squinting, and for a second I thought I saw a man in a long coat and hat, head bent as if against the storm. His boots, or what looked like boots, moved in a slow, steady rhythm, never faltering. His other hand was down at his side, empty, swinging just a little as he walked. The oddest part was that he wasn't walking with the traffic but against it, toward me. His eyes, or where his eyes should have been, were shadowed under the brim of that hat, but I felt it anyway. Felt him look at me. The kind of look that crawls across your skin like a centipede, makes you want to lock the doors and keep driving. That's what I did. I told myself he was just some drifter, maybe a rancher heading to check on cattle. People do strange things in the desert. The mind plays tricks in the dark. But the longer I drove, the worse I felt. The wind picked up, howling through the passes, shaking the car like a toy. The radio, which had been a steady hiss of static, began to cut in and out with fragments of voices, none of which I could make out. It was like hearing conversations through a motel wall, low, urgent, but muffled. I turned it off, but the silence was worse. About 15 minutes later, I saw the light again. Same lantern, same steady glow just ahead of me on the shoulder. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be the same man. I hadn't turned off the highway. There were no roads that cut across. But there he was, walking into the wind with that lantern, swinging at his side. This time I slowed almost to a crawl. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to prove to myself it was a man, flesh and blood. But as my headlights caught him, I realized there was no face to see. Just darkness under that hat, a hollow where his head should have been. And yet somehow, I knew he was staring right at me. I floored it. The car fishtailed on gravel and straightened, the engine groaning as I pushed it harder than I should have on that stretch of road. My hands were slick with sweat, though the heater wasn't even on. I drove for another half hour without seeing another soul, not even a trucker, but the whole time I had that feeling of being followed. Every time the wind gusted, I swore I heard footsteps in it, heavy and deliberate, keeping pace with the car. Guadalupe Mountains are full of canyons and old trails, and people say the pass has been used for centuries, by tribes, by settlers, by soldiers, by outlaws. Some of them never made it through. Some say bandits used to rob travelers there, leave them bleeding in the dirt while the wind carried their last breaths away. Others whisper about ranch hands caught in blizzards, lanterns in hand, who never found their way home. I can't tell you what I saw that night, not for sure. I can only tell you that when I finally crossed into New Mexico and saw the first glow of a town's lights on the horizon, I pulled over and shook so bad I could barely light a cigarette. The wind had gone still, just like that, and the road behind me was empty. No lantern, no man. Nothing but the hum of the engine and the dry hiss of sand against the fenders. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the windows just right, I swear I hear footsteps again, slow, heavy, coming closer. And when I close my eyes, I see that lantern swaying, steady as a heartbeat, guiding no one living through the pass. FM 33 cuts through a lonely stretch of Borden County, the kind of place where the land itself feels stripped bare, nothing but flat dirt horizons, wind, and the occasional stubborn mesquite clinging to life. Out there, you can drive 30 miles without seeing another vehicle, just your own reflection in the rear view and the long mirage shimmer ahead of you. Ranch fences run parallel to the asphalt, barbed wire catching the evening light like silver teeth, but otherwise there's nothing to break the sameness. People who aren't from West Texas say it all looks dead. Folks who grew up here know better. They know there are things still walking in it. I was running feed deliveries for a ranch outfit out of Gale when it happened. Old diesel flatbed, cab squealing like it needed a chiropractor. The bed stacked with sacks of pellets. The sun was dropping, red as a split lip, and the dust in the air turned everything the color of rust. I'd been on FM 33 100 times, but that night felt different from the start. The wind was down, the world too still, like the sky was holding its breath. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the first one, a dusty handprint on the tailgate, just one smeared, as if someone had pressed a dry, grit-caked palm to the metal. I figured it came from town, some ranch hand slapping the back of the truck when I wasn't looking, except the truck had been washed that morning. I'd checked. The metal had been clean, dull but spotless. I drove a few more miles. The road dipped and curved, and when I came out of the bend, I looked back again. There were two now, side by side, low down near the latch. The skin prickled on my arms, and I told myself it was dirt from the sacks of feed shifting in the bed. Still, I knew better. I hadn't touched the tailgate all day. FM 33 is one of those roads where your headlights just eat the dark in front of you, and the rest of the world doesn't exist. I rolled past mile markers I'd passed 100 times, the kind that lean sideways because no one cares enough to fix them. After marker 38, I glanced back. 3 handprints, then 4. I pressed the accelerator without meaning to. The diesel groaned, and the bags of feed rustled like something alive was buried under them. I rolled the window down, trying to catch the smell of rain or cedar, anything to ground me. All I got was the hot, dry stink of dust and cattle manure from miles off. Every few minutes I checked again, and each time there were more. 10, 15. They climbed up the metal like kids stacking hands on top of each other. The shapes were wrong, though. Too long in the fingers, too narrow in the palm. The streaks weren't oily like a real print. They were dry, powdery, like the dust had been scraped onto the surface by force. Once I thought I saw movement in the glass. Not mine. Pale shapes riding in the red glow of the taillights, leaning close, but when I craned my neck around, there was nothing on the road. Just empty blacktop and the suggestion of heat haze that shouldn't exist at night. By the time I hit marker 46, the whole tailgate was covered. Layer after layer of those gray smudges, as though 100 hands had tried to claw their way inside. My chest felt tight. I pulled over onto the shoulder, gravel crunching, and left the engine idling. The cicadas were loud all of a sudden, their whine filling the cab like static. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the air still and heavy. I walked to the back. The beam lit up the prints. Dozens of them, overlapping and sliding. Some smeared upward, others downward as though something had been dragged. The metal was hot under my fingertips, hotter than it had any right to be with night settled in. When I lifted my hand, I left another mark, but mine looked human, small, plain. The others didn't. That was when I heard it. The sound of bare feet slapping dirt, faint but steady, circling. I swung the light around, catching only grass and fence wire, but the noise kept moving. Always just beyond the edge of the beam, I shouted, "Who's there?" But my voice cracked, swallowed by the emptiness. The steps stopped. Dead silence. Then a handprint appeared fresh on the metal, right in front of me. I didn't see it form. 1 second it wasn't there. The next, it was powder thick, fingers stretched wider than mine could ever reach. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled back to the cab, gravel skidding under my boots. The truck shook once like someone had slapped the bed from underneath. I floored it, fishtailing back onto the road, and didn't ease up until the needle touched 80. I drove blind curves faster than I should have, dust boiling in the mirrors. I didn't dare look back. Not until the lights of Gale showed in the distance, faint orange against the horizon. When I finally checked the glass, the tailgate was clean. Every smear, every mark, gone. Just dull metal and the faint reflection of my headlights. I parked in town and walked around the truck 3 times under the street lamp. Nothing. Like it had never happened. The sheriff's deputy that night saw me and asked if I was drunk. I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say, that ghosts had ridden my truck like kids hitching on the back of a feed wagon? I went home, locked my doors, and tried to sleep. The wind had picked up, howling across the flats, and every time grit hit the windows, I saw the shape of a handprint. A week later, I was back on FM 33. You can't avoid the road if you live out here. I was hauling lumber this time, telling myself I'd imagined it, stress playing tricks on a tired mind. The night was cooler, stars sharp enough to cut you. Everything was fine until marker 38. When I glanced in the mirror, I saw the first handprint. Just one. Fresh. I almost turned back, but something in me froze, like I knew I wouldn't outrun it no matter where I went. So I kept driving. Each mile another appeared. I watched them grow, watched them stack, and by the time I hit 46 again, I wasn't even scared. Just hollow, like I'd been claimed. The thing about FM 33 is you don't have to believe me. Drive. It yourself. Wash your truck, take it out there alone at night, keep checking your mirror, count the miles. You'll see the first one around the bend, then another, then more. And when you stop, if you're stupid enough to stop, you'll hear them running. Bare feet in the dust, coming closer. Don't wait around for the last print. Don't give them the chance to climb inside. FM 89 runs out of Abilene like a dark ribbon, curling through mesquite country where the land folds into low ridges and thickets. I'd driven it 100 times before, usually in daylight, usually when the road felt like just another stretch of Texas highway. But that night in late October, when the wind carried a dry rustle through the grass and the air smelled of dust and cedar smoke, FM 89 felt like something older and stranger. I was headed back to Buffalo Gap from Abilene, taking the long way, after dropping off some supplies at a buddy's shop. The road was empty, the sky moonless, and my headlights tunneled forward into what felt like an endless black. I started noticing it just past Elm Valley Road, where the mesquite stands get thick along the bar ditches. At first, I thought it was nothing but shadows bending across the pavement as my beams caught the branches. Mesquite trees have a way of looking twisted in the right light, their limbs crooked and bony like hands trying to scrape the air. But as I drove, the shadows didn't sway the way they should have. They weren't dancing with the wind. They weren't stationary either. They moved. They kept pace with my truck, lining the shoulder as though walking alongside me, shifting and flowing, but always keeping up. I eased off the gas and leaned forward over the wheel, squinting. My high beams punched into the road and cut across the brush, but nothing explained the shapes. For a mile they stretched along, maybe half a dozen at first, then more, until I couldn't count them anymore. Long, thin silhouettes like human figures, darker than the night around them. I tried telling myself it was just a trick of the light, the way headlights can stretch and warp things into shapes they're not. But then one of the shadows broke away from the rest, sliding up closer until it ran just outside my passenger window. I glanced to the right and saw nothing but scrub and barbed wire fence, but in the corner of my eye, the figure's outline ran right alongside the truck, its limbs keeping stride. The unease that crawled over me was like a weight on my chest. I cranked the radio, some old George Strait song coming faint and tinny through the static, just to drown out the sound of my own breath. But the shadows didn't fall back. They didn't break. They flowed with me mile after mile, their shapes keeping time with the hum of the tires on asphalt. My speedometer crept up past 70, then 75. Still there. The faster I went, the more they leaned forward like they were gaining strength, feeding off my speed. The road cut toward Buffalo Gap, and the yellow glow from town should have shone on the horizon, but that night it felt like the dark went on forever. That's when I caught movement in the rearview mirror. Not the red glow of my taillights bouncing back, but darker shapes darting behind me, rising up from the ditches. At least 3, maybe 4 of them sprinting straight down the center line, their shadows bending and stretching across the cracked pavement. My grip on the wheel went slick with sweat. My mouth had gone dry. I told myself not to stop. Don't ever stop. But when the first shape slammed against the side of the truck, the whole cab shuddered. It sounded like a body hitting metal, a heavy, dull thud. I jerked the wheel and swore, staring hard at the shoulder, expecting to see someone tumbling. But there was no one. Just the fence posts flicking by in my headlights and the brush whipping in the night wind. My truck bore a smear down the passenger door, faint and dusty, like something had pressed its whole hand against it. Not a print exactly, more like a smudge that streaked back toward the taillight. I gunned the engine. 80, 85. The steering wheel trembled under my hands. The shapes were everywhere now, keeping pace with the truck on both sides, darting in and out like wolves circling prey. One broke forward far enough that I swear it crossed the road ahead of me, a pitch-black silhouette gliding across the white stripes and vanishing into the opposite ditch. I didn't blink. I couldn't. I just fixed my eyes on the center line and prayed the town lights would break through the horizon. When I finally hit Buffalo Gap proper, the shadows peeled away as sudden as they'd come. The town's street lamps cut across the old brick buildings and the quiet houses, and the road behind me looked plain and empty again. My breath rattled as though I'd run a mile. I slowed down, parked near the church, and climbed out just to feel something solid under me. The night was still. The wind tugged at the trees. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole damn thing. But the truck door was different. The dust smears weren't gone. 5 distinct streaks dragged down the paint, long and uneven, like something with fingers too thin and too long had tried to pull itself inside. I ran my hand over them, half expecting the dust to wipe away. It didn't. The marks clung to the paint like they'd been burned in, etched faint but permanent. I tried not to touch it again. I got back in the cab, locked the doors, and drove home through town, headlights tight on the road, refusing to look left or right. I didn't tell anybody right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew how it would sound. Folks around here all know the old stories, though. Every ranch hand and late-night driver between Abilene and Buffalo Gap has heard the talk about shadows that run the highway, keeping step with you until you're far enough gone or foolish enough to stop. Some say it's the dead from Indian raids. Some say it's men who froze to death when the fronts came through, wandering for warmth they'll never find. My granddad used to claim they were soldiers left over from some war we forgot about, marching in the ditches until the world ended. Nobody agrees on the details, but everybody has a story. I haven't taken FM 89 at night since. Daylight? Sure. When the sun's up, the mesquite just looks like mesquite again. But when the evening comes and the shadows stretch, I'll drive the long way through Highway 277. People ask why, and I just shrug. What else can I say? That I saw the night itself take shape and run beside me? That something in the dark pressed its hand against my truck and left a mark I'll never scrub clean? I keep the truck washed regular now, but no matter how hard I scrub, the streaks on the door never fade. They're always there, faint and waiting, catching the light just enough to remind me. The road doesn't forget, and I know if I ever let myself get caught out there after sundown again, the shadows will be waiting too, ready to keep pace until I can't outrun them anymore. The toll road south of Austin is strange enough even in the daylight, wide and empty compared to I-35, cutting through scrubland and the flat sprawl of Mustang Ridge. I'd driven it plenty of times before, and I knew where every booth, every toll reader, every overpass was supposed to be. That's why what happened to me one late night in July still gnaws at me, because I can't explain it in any way that doesn't make me sound like I lost my grip on reality somewhere between the access ramp and the long stretch of State Highway 130. I left a warehouse in San Marcos around midnight after helping a friend move some equipment. He'd paid me in cash and beer, which meant I was a little sweaty, a little wired from caffeine but sober. I took 130 north because it was faster, less congested, and I figured the tolls were worth the quiet. The highway was nearly deserted that night. Just the occasional set of headlights in the opposite lane and the steady hum of cicadas spilling in through the crack in my window. The sky was a flat, starless black, and the air hung heavy with that thick, central Texas humidity that makes even the asphalt feel alive. About 10 miles past the Creedmoor exit, my GPS chimed. A little toll icon flashed on the screen, the kind that shows up when you pass under one of those big gantry readers. Except I hadn't. There was no overpass, no metal structure stretched. Across the road, no booth, nothing but 2 endless lanes bordered by mesquite and barbed wire fences. The screen blinked like I'd just passed a tolling point, and then it updated with a balance due. 147. I slowed down instinctively, peering out at the dark highway, half expecting to see the faint silhouette of a gantry I'd missed. But there was nothing, just the flat sweep of pavement and the white reflective paint catching my headlights. My phone sat in its holder, the screen glowing too bright, that toll icon stubbornly displayed. I muttered to myself that it must be a glitch. I'd had GPS hiccups before where it thought I was on the frontage road when I wasn't. But even after I drove several more miles, another icon popped up. Toll charged, $2.15. Again, no booth, no reader, not even a sign, just the silent dark. Something about it bothered me in a way that went beyond software errors. It was the silence, the empty feel of the road, like I'd slipped onto some parallel stretch that wasn't maintained by TXDOT anymore. I turned off the radio because the static between stations made the unease worse. My headlights tunneled through the dark, and I started catching movement at the edges of the beam, shadows flicking across the frontage like someone walking along the bar ditch, only there was no one there when I looked. Another toll hit. $3.66. This time, my bank app buzzed. I glanced down and saw the charge pending. It wasn't just GPS, it was billing me in real time. The line item read Central Texas Mobility SA-130 like any normal toll, but the timestamp was exact to the second I'd felt that GPS chime. That's when my stomach went cold. It wasn't just some error in the mapping software. Someone or something was charging me for a toll that didn't exist. I thought about pulling over, but the shoulders were narrow and my gut told me not to stop on that road, not in that kind of silence. I pushed the accelerator, letting the engine climb as if speed could put distance between me and whatever was happening. The faster I drove, the more frequent the charges came. Every 2 or 3 minutes, another toll. My phone screen filled with them, little chimes stacking until I silenced it. Then I saw it. Up ahead, the faint glow of lights strung across the highway. For a second, relief washed over me. A booth, maybe one I'd forgotten about, something physical to ground what was happening. But as I drew closer, the structure didn't look like a toll reader. The lights weren't the harsh white LEDs TXDOT used. They were dull, yellowed, flickering like old sodium lamps. And the shape wasn't a gantry. It was more like a skeletal frame of an overpass, rusted metal beams with pieces of wood bolted in strange angles like something half-built and abandoned decades ago. My headlights rolled over it and the air seemed to change, heavy with the smell of burnt oil and something sour like stagnant water. Beneath the frame stood figures, not workers, not officers, but shapes, tall, thin silhouettes that seemed to ripple against the light. I gripped the wheel, heart slamming, and for a moment I thought I saw their faces glint like glass, reflecting back my own headlights. As I passed beneath, every electronic thing in my car died. The dash went black. The engine cut and I coasted in dead silence under that rusted arch. The world shrank to the rattle of my tires against the grooves of the pavement. I tried to breathe, but the air felt like it had weight. Out the corner of my eye, I swear I saw one of those figures lean toward my window, its head tilting like a curious bird. Then just as suddenly the car roared back to life. Headlights, dash lights, engine all flared on at once. I floored it, refusing to look in the mirrors, driving harder than I ever had in my life. By the time I reached Mustang Ridge proper, sweat had soaked through my shirt and my bank app showed nearly 30 charges stacked in a row. The next morning, I checked again. The charges were still there, cleared from pending to posted, neat, little line items, each one time-stamped within minutes of each other. I called the toll authority and gave them my license plate, my route, everything. The woman on the phone told me, polite but firm, that there were no recorded gantries where I said I'd been charged. She even emailed me the official map. According to their system, I hadn't been billed at all. But my bank statement shows otherwise, and it still does. Every month since that night, I get one more charge, always at 3:12 a.m., the exact minute I drove under that strange frame. Always listed as SH-130 toll. My bank can't trace it, the toll authority denies it, and I don't dare dispute it, because deep down I'm terrified of what happens if I refuse to pay. Sometimes late at night when I take that road again against my better judgment, I glance at the empty highway and swear I see the faint yellow glow of those lamps flickering miles ahead, waiting for me. And every time I pass that stretch, my phone buzzes. Another toll, collected by something that never needed a booth in the first place. FM 1472 is one of those roads that feels older than the pavement laid on it. They call it Mines Road, stretching north out of Laredo and hugging the Rio Grande's shifting ribbon, a place where the mesquite roots choke the ground and dust sticks in your teeth like grit from some forgotten quarry. Truckers know it well, the long-haul runs that cross back and forth between Mexico and Texas, semis lined up in convoys that glow like metal snakes in the night. I used to drive that stretch 3, sometimes 4 nights a week when I was younger, taking parts from warehouses outside Laredo up to the yards past Carrizo. Everyone who works that road has a story, but there's one in particular that still makes my hands sweat when I grip a steering wheel. They call them the border lights. Floating headlights, silent, steady, gliding through the dark without a single engine note to explain them. I first heard about them from a man named Ray, an old trucker I met at a diner near Ensenal. He leaned across the booth, his hands trembling around a coffee mug, and said, "They pace you, kid. Perfect speed. You see them in the mirrors and they don't belong to anything. No sound, no vibration, just lights, like someone riding your blind spot. And when you notice too long, they're gone. Just gone." I chalked it up to fatigue, stories cooked up by drivers half mad from staring at lines and taillights too long. But when it happened to me, I knew Ray hadn't been making things up. If anything, he hadn't told me the half of it. It was late July, hotter than sin even at midnight. I'd picked up a load from the freight yard near Mines Road and was heading north. The air was heavy with the stink of diesel dust and river water. I remember my shirt sticking to my back, the night insects drumming against the windshield. Traffic was thin, just me and a handful of semis spaced out along the blacktop. My rig wasn't much, an old Peterbilt with more rust than chrome, but she pulled steady. Around mile marker 40, just past a gravel turnout where coyotes liked to cross, I caught it. At first I thought it was just another pair of headlights in my mirror, bright, white, clean like the beam from a new SUV or pickup, but there was no sound, no rush of air as it drew near. Nothing to say it was a real vehicle. Just 2 orbs of light keeping perfect pace behind me. I eased down on the gas, dropped 5 miles per hour. The lights slowed too, never closing distance. My pulse climbed, my hands tightening around the wheel. I told myself it had to be some custom rig with a quiet engine, maybe electric, though that made no sense out here in the brush country. Another trucker pulled into the lane beside me, a refrigerated trailer, chrome mirrors flashing under the moonlight. The lights behind me shifted, slipped between us, and held there like a phantom wedged between steel walls. The other driver didn't react. His face glowed blue from the dash, blank as stone. It was like he couldn't see them at all. That's when I noticed something else. The CB had gone silent. Normally, even in the dead of night, you'd hear chatter, warnings, about DPS cruisers, jokes, music bleeding through static. But all I got was dead air, like someone had turned the volume knob down to nothing. The only sound left was my tires humming against the pavement and the occasional cicada shriek carried on the wind through the cracked window. I tried to shake it off, but then the lights made their move. They surged forward, not like an engine, revving not with acceleration that made sense, but like they glided. One instant behind me, the next riding alongside, hovering just off the shoulder where no car could possibly fit. I stole a glance and my mouth went dry. There was no vehicle. No hood, no grille, no outline of metal. Just floating headlights glowing clean and sharp in the air, bobbing slightly as if tied to invisible axles. They didn't throw beams across the brush either. No shadows stretched. They only lit themselves, 2 floating orbs burning white and cold. I must have stared too long because I drifted toward the rumble strip and jerked the wheel back hard. When I looked again, the lights were gone. Just gone. Like they'd blinked out of existence. My heart hammered in my chest, sweat soaking through my cap. I told myself it was heat stroke, maybe fatigue, but something in my gut said I'd seen what Ray and the others had whispered about. I pulled off at the next turnout, cut the engine, and sat in the dark for a long while listening to cicadas and distant freight horns. But that wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. The second time it happened, I was southbound, weeks later, carrying pallets of canned goods toward the border warehouses. The road was near empty, just a convoy of 3 semis ahead, and me trailing. Midnight again, and the air thick with the scent of rain from a storm that had passed hours earlier. My windshield smeared with fine mist, wipers dragging. That's when I saw them reappear. This time not behind me, but weaving between the convoy ahead. Headlights that weren't attached to anything, sliding effortlessly between trailers like they belonged in the lane. Yet no brake lights reacted, no horns, nothing. The drivers didn't see a thing. Only me. I swear I could feel the pressure change when they drew close, like static rolling over the cab, making the hair on my arms stand on end. Then as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone, vanishing near a bend in the road where the brush grew thick against rusted fencing. I asked around more after that, in diners, in truck stops, under buzzing neon lights where men nursed bitter, coffee and cigarettes. A few drivers nodded knowingly but kept their mouths shut. Others whispered stories about crashes along FM 1472, rigs jackknifed without cause, drivers found slumped at the wheel with eyes wide open but no sign of heart trouble. Rumors tied it to migrants who never made it across, their lives cut off in the desert, their restless spirits clinging to the only lights they'd known, headlights on a highway that never ends. Some said it was cartel business, convoys smuggling, in the night. The lights of escort vehicles erased by something darker, leaving only floating remnants. None of the theories made sense, but every time I hit that road, I felt it in my bones. The border lights weren't just a story. They were real, and they had a purpose. The last time I drove Mines Road, I swore off it for good. I was hauling empty crates back toward Laredo, nothing but shadows stretching across the Mesquite Flats, the river a black line to my right. I kept my eyes forward, hands steady, telling myself I'd get through without looking in the mirrors. But habit dies hard. Around mile marker 60, I glanced back, and there they were. Not 2 this time, but 4, maybe 6, a cluster of headlights, floating in formation, keeping exact pace with my rig. They drew closer, slipping to the side until they flanked me, surrounding the cab in a cage of light. I couldn't hear my own engine anymore. Couldn't hear the tires or the air. Just silence, crushing and absolute. My skin prickled as if thousands of unseen eyes watched from the dark. Then the lights surged ahead, one by one, vanishing into the night until I was alone again, shaking so hard my teeth clattered. I parked that truck in Laredo, handed the keys back to dispatch, and told them I wouldn't run Mines Road again. They laughed, said I'd spooked myself on ghost stories. Maybe I had. But to this day, when I think of that road, I see those headlights floating in the black, pacing me, studying me, waiting for me to slip. They don't belong to trucks. They don't belong to anything human. And if you ever find yourself out on FM 1472 after midnight with the Rio Grande whispering nearby and the brush shifting in the heat, don't trust the lights in your mirror, because when they come, and they will, you'll learn the same thing I did. They don't just follow. They choose who gets to leave that road and who doesn't. The night I drove that stretch of FM 400 outside of Slayton, I hadn't planned on taking any back roads. I was heading home from a late shift in Lubbock, bone-tired, the radio low, and the steady hum of the tires my only company. It was September, the tail end of cotton season, and I could smell that faint, earthy musk that comes when the stalks start to dry and the bolls hang heavy in the fields. The road was empty, no headlights ahead or behind, and the flat plains stretched black and endless in every direction. I had driven that highway 100 times, knew every windmill and fence post along it, but that night I saw something I'd never seen before. The sign appeared just past a faded gas station that had been closed for years. Big orange letters, reflective under my headlights, detour, black arrow pointing right. It made no sense because the road ahead looked fine, no construction cones, no flashing lights, no trucks. But instinct made me slow, and maybe it was the exhaustion that kept me from thinking too hard. I turned where the arrow pointed, tires crunching gravel as I left the familiar asphalt. The path led me between low barbed wire fences and out into the cotton. The plants stood tall, white tufts catching the beams of my lights like little ghosts. The road narrowed to dirt, rutted from old tractor tires, but the sign had been official looking enough that I told myself it must be temporary routing. The farther I went, the less sure I was. My speed dropped to a crawl, dust rising behind me. After maybe 5 minutes of winding through the rows, I saw another sign. Detour, arrow left. I followed. The turns kept coming, each one marked by another orange sign, the reflective paint glowing unnaturally bright against the dark. It felt endless. The cotton fields swallowed everything, the horizon gone, no farmhouses, no lights except my own. Just black sky and white dots like driving through a snowstorm frozen in place. Then my headlights swung across something that made my stomach tighten. A junction. Asphalt again. The very same spot where I'd first turned off. The dead gas station. The fence, the first detour sign. I slowed to a stop, confused. I had looped back. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. I rolled down my window, the dry night air rushing in, carrying the faint rattle of cotton bolls knocking against each other in the wind. I circled back to the highway, but the orange sign was still there, arrow still pointing right as if daring. Me? I should have ignored it then, kept going north toward home, but something pulled me, like the road itself was insisting. I told myself I'd keep straighter this time, watch carefully for where I'd gone wrong. Again the fields. Again the dust. Again the endless rows that looked the same in every direction. I kept checking my rear view, but the lights of the highway were gone. Even the faint orange glow of Slayton wasn't there anymore, just blackness. Another turn, another arrow, and when the tires hit pavement again, I knew before I even looked. Same junction, same station. By then my hands were slick on the wheel, my heart thudding. I sat there idling, staring at that detour sign. The reflective paint seemed brighter now, almost humming with light. I killed my headlights and sat in darkness, thinking maybe I'd see the trick, but the sign still glowed faintly as if lit from within. I pulled out my phone. No service, not a single bar. I swore under my breath, the sound harsh in the silence. The cotton fields rustled faintly, but there was no wind. The bolls shifted like something moving among them. I told myself I'd prove it was some prank. Farmers had all sorts of ways to screw with trespassers. I threw the truck back into gear and took the detour again, faster this time, bumping hard over ruts. The dust cloud billowed behind me, and every arrow pointed the way like it had been waiting. But as I drove, I began to notice things I hadn't before. Shapes in the cotton rows. At first I thought they were scarecrows, silhouettes hunched and crooked, but as the headlights swept them, they seemed to turn. I glimpsed faces pale and slack, eyes that caught the light just long enough to glint like marbles. My stomach churned. I gripped the wheel tighter, forced myself not to slow down. Then the road narrowed further, cotton brushing against the sides of the truck, scraping faintly like fingernails across metal. Something slapped against the back window, a handprint, clear in the dust. I whipped around, but there was nothing in the bed, just the empty air shimmering with dust motes. The arrows came quicker, like they were funneling me toward something, and when I hit pavement again, my chest went hollow. Same junction, same sign. Only this time the gas station wasn't abandoned. The lights were on inside, buzzing faintly. I could see movement through the dusty glass. I didn't stop. I didn't even look twice. I floored it past the sign, back onto FM 400, the tires screaming as I hit the asphalt. My headlights caught only empty road ahead, but I didn't trust it until I saw the glow of Slayton's water tower in the distance. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the clock on the dash said it was after 4 in the morning. I should have been home before midnight. 4 hours, gone, swallowed up in those fields. The next day I drove back in daylight, just to prove to myself it was some exhausted hallucination. There was no detour sign, no orange paint, no stakes in the ground. Just the dead gas station, its windows boarded, and the flat stretch of cotton fields on either side. But when I parked and walked along the edge of the field, my boots crunching the dry earth, I found something pressed deep in the dirt between the rows, a signpost, broken off at the base, jagged and rusted, the metal still faintly painted in reflective orange. I haven't driven FM 400 at night since, and sometimes when the wind rattles through the cotton around my house, I hear the faint knock of bowls against each other, steady and rhythmic, like they're spelling something out. And I wonder how many times that detour really let me out, and how many times I'm still circling those fields. The Pecos River Bridge on US 90 always looked like some kind of skeletal beast to me, all rusted iron ribs stretching across the canyon where the water cut deep through the limestone. You don't forget the first time you see it, especially at night when your headlights catch the beams and the shadows fall down into the gorge like endless black claws. They say when it was built in the 1940s, it was one of the tallest bridges in the country. It carried trains first, then cars, but by the 70s, the old tracks that used to run alongside were ripped up, abandoned after the freight companies shifted routes. I didn't know all that when I first started running long haul, but the locals at a truck stop near Comstock told me the story, in that half-laughing, half-serious way that makes you wonder if they want you to believe it or just to carry it around in your head so it rattles when you're out there alone. They said if you're near the Pecos Bridge at midnight, you can hear a train whistle cut through the canyon, long and hollow. Even though the rails have been gone for decades, sometimes people swear they see lights, a phantom engine sliding along air above the river, and sometimes, if you're unlucky, you hear the whistle not from the canyon, but right behind you, close enough to rattle the glass of your cab. The first time I crossed there at night, I caught myself checking the dash clock every mile like I wanted to be sure I wasn't hitting that exact stroke of midnight. It was 11:42 when I started over the bridge. Nothing but the crunch of tires and the distant splash of water far below. My rig shuddered in the crosswind, and the guardrails clanged faintly as though something tapped them from the dark. I didn't hear anything then, but once you plant an idea like that in your mind, it doesn't leave. The second time, about a year later, I wasn't so lucky. I'd been running a load from Del Rio out toward El Paso, later than I liked, and the bridge came up with the moon hanging low and orange, swollen with dust from the desert. I was halfway across when I felt a vibration, not from the road but deeper, like the kind of rumble you feel in your bones when a train's coming long before you hear it. I killed the radio and leaned forward. Then it came. Faint at first, a whistle so drawn out it didn't sound like any train I'd ever heard. It rose out of the canyon and echoed up the limestone until the metal beams of the bridge seemed to hum with it. My hands tightened on the wheel and I caught myself holding my breath. The whistle went on and on until I realized it wasn't fading like an echo should. It was circling, winding around me, curling through the steel like the bridge itself was, breathing. When it cut off, it was so sudden the silence felt louder, the kind that presses into your ears. I told myself it was some trick of wind, a coyote, anything. But when I pulled off on the other side to check my tires, I found a film of soot along the trailer's back doors. Black streaks like smoke had rolled over it, though there hadn't been another vehicle in sight for 20 miles. I should have left it at that. Just one of those road stories you laugh off in a diner. But it kept coming back, gnawing at me when I tried to sleep in my cab. The thing about long haul is you get used to being alone, and your mind starts feeding on itself. I found myself timing runs so I'd hit that bridge near midnight, not to avoid it but to test it, to prove to myself it was just nerves. One night I parked off the shoulder a quarter mile before the span, engine off, cab lights dead. Midnight rolled in. I could hear the river far below, a faint trickle and the wind straining through the beams. The air grew colder. Then, without warning, the whistle blasted. So sharp and close I felt the glass in my windshield buzz. My whole rig shook as though something massive thundered past, and I swear I saw shadows slide across my mirrors like cars in a convoy behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing, only blackness stretching back down the highway. The soot came again, heavier this time, curling under the doors like someone had dragged a burning rag along the paint. That was the last time I tried to wait for it. After that, I drove the bridge without stopping, no matter the hour, eyes straight ahead. What I couldn't shake was the story one of the old men at the stop told me later. Back before the tracks were torn up, there'd been a derailment out there, a freight that jumped and went into the canyon. Tankers full of oil caught fire, and the crew in the caboose never made it out. Folks downriver said the smoke turned the Pecos black for days. They claimed some bodies were never pulled out, just cooked into the wreckage. Hearing that made the soot on my trailer feel like more than coincidence. Like something still burned, down there, waiting. And maybe the whistle wasn't a warning but a reminder. I started taking other routes when I could. Longer hauls that ate time and fuel but spared me that stretch. Still, every so often dispatch would send me through Delhi, Rio, and I'd know I was headed back. The last time was late summer, thick heat sticking even at night. I was already sweating through my shirt when I hit the canyon, and the bridge loomed ahead like an iron skeleton against a thundercloud sky. It was 12:01 when I touched the span, too late to turn back. The whistle came at once, not distant this time but directly overhead, so loud it drove needles through my skull. My headlights flickered, stuttering on the beams, and for one frozen second I saw it. A line of cars above me, wheels sparking on tracks that weren't there, an engine belching smoke that poured straight down over my cab. Figures leaned from the windows, hollow-eyed, faces pale with ash, mouths moving in silence though the whistle screamed. I slammed the accelerator and felt the truck lurch, fighting me like the air itself had turned solid. The cab filled with the stench of burnt oil and scorched metal. The horn cut off just as I reached the far side, plunging everything into a silence so total it made my ears ring. When I stopped 20 miles later at a lonely fuel station, I found handprints on the back doors of the trailer, black and smeared, pressed in soot. Each one was too large, stretched long like the fingers, didn't end where they should. I don't run west anymore. I tell dispatch to cut me off before Del Rio. Let somebody else take the border stretch. They think I'm just tired of the run, but I know better. Whatever rides that bridge still runs its midnight schedule, no matter what the timetables say, no matter that the rails have been gone for half a century. It isn't looking to carry freight anymore, it's looking for company. And if you're out there at the wrong hour, engine idling under the beams, you might just hear the whistle call your name. The first time I drove the Three Sisters loop outside Leakey, I thought the stories about it were just the kind of tall tales Texans tell each other over a beer. Ranch roads 335, 336, and 337 are famous among bikers and road trippers for their sharp curves and sweeping views through the hill country. But they've got another reputation too. One people mention with a sideways glance and a quieter voice. They say sometimes when you take the curves at night, you'll hear the seatbelt on your passenger side click shut, even though no one is sitting there. A moment later, the windshield will fog, as if someone's breathing slow and steady, cold enough to miss the glass even on a warm Texas night. I laughed it off until the night it happened to me, and I've never driven those roads the same way since. It was late March, and the bluebonnets were just starting to take over the ditches and fields. I'd been staying in Kerrville for work, and decided to take a long weekend detour south, driving the loop that bikers call one of the best rides in the country. The sun had gone down by the time I hit Leakey, but I wasn't worried. I'd driven plenty of hill country roads at night. You get used to the sound of your tires humming over caliche dust, the way your headlights catch the reflective eyes of deer just before they bolt. I stopped at a little diner for coffee before taking 337 west, and the old waitress gave me a look when I told her I was planning to do the Three Sisters that night. She said, "You mind the curves, son. And if somebody rides along with you, you just keep your mouth shut and your hands on the wheel." I thought she meant hitchhikers, I didn't ask. By the time I was on 335, the roads were empty. That part of Texas gets so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face unless the moon's out. And that night the sky was low with clouds, smothering any light. My brights carved a narrow path ahead, bending hard around switchbacks. The air smelled like cedar and damp earth, and now and then a gust of wind carried something sharper, almost metallic like rusted iron. I figured it was just the scent of the rocks after a day of sun, Somewhere out there, coyotes yipped, and the sound traveled strange in the hills, echoing like voices calling from both directions at once. The first odd thing was the seatbelt. I was halfway up a steep curve when I heard the click. Sharp, mechanical, undeniable. The passenger seatbelt slid out as if pulled by an invisible hand and snapped into the buckle. I froze, my hands tightening on the wheel, but I didn't dare. Look to the right. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my eyes forward. I tried to tell myself maybe the inertia of the curve jerked the belt loose and it latched on its own, but anyone who's driven old Texas backroads knows seatbelts don't do that without help. A minute later, the windshield fogged in two patches, right in front of where a passenger would be breathing. It was cold too, colder than the air outside. I could feel the temperature drop along my arm, the hairs on my skin rising as if brushed by static. I wanted to roll down the window but couldn't bring myself to move. My ears picked up something faint under the hum of the tires, breathing. A long inhale, then an exhale that rattled like someone with fluid in their lungs. That's when the story I'd once overheard in a San Antonio bar came back to me. 3 sisters had died on these roads back in the 50s, each on a different stretch of the loop. A bus full of church kids wrecked in the rain, or maybe it was 3 girls driving home from a dance. The versions change, but the endings, the same. They never made it back. Folks say they still ride with travelers, warning them or maybe just reliving the way they died. The curves got sharper. Every time I downshifted and tapped the brake, the unseen passenger seemed to lean with me, as if their weight shifted in the seat. I kept telling myself it was in my head, but when I glanced at the side mirror, I swear I saw a pale blur of a face, hair plastered against the glass like it was wet. I jerked my eyes back to the road, heart slamming, and nearly ran off the edge, where the guardrail hugged the drop. I slowed way down after that, crawling at 20, but the weight beside me didn't lift. Whoever, or whatever it was, had no intention of leaving yet. On 336, the road narrows and the trees crowd close, branches clawing at the roof if you drift too far. That's when the smell hit me, sudden and sour, like stagnant water mixed with burnt rubber. My throat tightened. I thought I heard whispering, a woman's voice, maybe 2 or 3, too low to make out words but high enough that it carried like a hymn. The kind you'd hear in a small white church on Sunday morning. It wound into my ears, threading through the hum of the engine. My chest felt heavy, like the seatbelt across my ribs had cinched tighter, but I hadn't touched it. The fog on, the glass spread wider, pressing cold into my bones. By the time I hit 337 east back toward Leakey, I was shaking. My knuckles were white on the wheel. I prayed the whole way down, out loud, not even caring what words came out, just begging for daylight, for company, for anything to make the pressure in that car lift. The whispers rose to a soft chorus, and I could swear I heard one word over and over: stay. My headlights flickered once, just a pulse, and for a heartbeat, I thought they were going to cut out entirely. The chorus swelled, a hiss and a hum, and then just as suddenly it stopped. The passenger seatbelt clicked open. The fog thinned. The air warmed to normal. It was like whatever had been there decided I wasn't worth keeping after all. When I rolled into Leakey, I pulled into the first gas station I saw and stumbled out of the car, sucking in the warm night air. The clerk behind the counter took one look at me and said, "You went around the sisters, didn't you?" I didn't answer, just bought another coffee and sat shaking under the fluorescence until I felt steady enough to keep going. I never told anyone the full story until now, and I'll never drive those roads at night again. Some people say the 3 sisters take care of travelers, that they ride with you to make sure you don't crash on the curves. Others say they're jealous, angry you're alive when they're not, and if you don't respect them, they'll keep you. I don't know which version I believe, but I know the sound of a seatbelt clicking shut when no one's there. I know the weight of breath fogging the glass in an empty car. And I know that sometimes when you pass a curve in the dark hill country, you're not driving alone, no matter what the road looks like. FM 563 runs low and lonely through Liberty County, the kind of Texas highway where you can drive for 20 minutes and not pass another set of headlights. It cuts between pine stands and thick bayou marsh, the ditches on both sides filling with black water after every storm. I had driven it enough times in my life to know every bend and pothole, but that night, coming back from a late service call in Anahuac, the road felt like something out of a fever dream, stretched longer than it should be, hushed in a way that made me lower the radio even though no one was with me. The clock on my dash read 12:41 a.m., and the air outside was heavy, the kind that leaves sweat on your skin even with the AC running. The pine trees pressed close in some stretches, then broke open into low marsh where you could see the moss hanging in thick beards off the water oaks and cypress. The smell of mud and brackish water got into the cab every time I cracked the window to flick a cigarette ash. I had just passed the turnoff toward Moss Bluff when I saw him or it in the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just moss blowing in the wind, caught high in a branch and pulled loose, but it wasn't in the trees. It was on the shoulder. And when I slowed just enough to look, I realized I was staring at something running alongside my truck. It was shaped like a man, but taller, the shoulders narrow, the arms long enough that the dripping strands of what looked like Spanish moss swung against its knees. The body looked like it was entirely covered in it, draped and sodden, a figure made from the bayou itself, strands of green and gray hanging wet down to where its feet should have been. But there were no feet. At least none I could see. The thing was keeping pace with me, and when I glanced at the side mirror, my headlights showed nothing on the pavement. No shadow. No footprints pressed in the wet blacktop, though I swore I heard the slap of something running. I pressed the gas harder, thinking maybe fatigue was getting the better of me. Maybe I was seeing the curtain of moss in the trees alongside the road and my brain was mixing it with the motion of the truck. But when I hit 75, the figure kept pace, not straining, not even changing its rhythm, just loping alongside the truck with its arms swaying like a slow pendulum. Its head tilted toward me. I could see where a face should have been, but it wasn't skin. It was moss too, hanging over where eyes and mouth should be, wet and dripping in ropes that slapped against its chest. When the figure leaned closer toward the cab, I swear I felt the AC falter, like the air itself got thicker and wet inside. I punched the accelerator, taking a curve faster than I should have, the tires whining against the pavement. When I looked, again the shoulder was empty. Just cypress, black water, and 100 dangling veils of moss. My chest hurt from how hard I was breathing. I kept telling myself it was just my mind conjuring shapes out of shadows, the way you see faces in clouds, or demons in wood grain. But the next mile marker came and I caught sight of it again, now running closer, so near that if I rolled the window down I could have reached out and touched its moss-dripping arm. It turned its head again toward me, and I swear the moss shifted, just enough for me to see something darker underneath, like sockets, like empty hollows where eyes might once have been. I wanted to floor it, but a part of me was afraid to make any sudden change, like prey might when it notices a predator. I just held steady at 80 and tried not to look. The road ahead narrowed, where the ditch on the right widened into a patch of water, stagnant and littered with old bottles and driftwood. That's when the figure stopped running and broke off, sliding straight across the ditch as if the water wasn't there, the moss draping down into the surface without disturbing a single ripple. By the time I got to Liberty proper, the lights of town, the gas station on the corner, the empty Dairy Queen lot, everything felt unreal, like I'd slipped into a world that was only pretending to be familiar. I didn't stop, not until I made it back to Dayton and pulled into my own driveway. I sat in the truck for a long time with the engine off, the sound of the cicadas buzzing thick in the heat. When I finally stepped out, I noticed something strange. There were wet drips on the passenger side door, long streaks that looked like water had run down from the window to the handle. But it hadn't rained in 3 days. I didn't sleep much that night, and when I did, I dreamed of marsh water and trees draped in moss, the kind you can't see through, the kind that shifts when the wind should be still. The next morning I went out to look at the truck again, half convincing myself I'd imagined the streaks. They were gone, dried away, but at the base of the door, in the dust and grit near the tire, were faint green smears, like wet moss dragged along the metal. I told myself it was just something I picked up driving past the marsh, some scrap of greenery that clung to the truck and fell loose. That worked for a few days, until I drove FM 563 again. I swore I'd avoid it, but sometimes it's the only straight shot south. This time I kept my eyes locked on the road, hands clamped at 10 and 2, the radio up too loud. I thought maybe if I didn't look, it couldn't find me again. But right as I passed the same marker near Moss Bluff, the music cut out. Just static, all at once. The headlights dimmed and flickered like something pulled juice from the battery. I didn't need to look to know it was there, but I did, and it was running right there, closer than before. So close I could see the moss dripping onto the door, not leaving water spots this time but pressing itself against the glass, hanging there in heavy strands. I didn't take FM 563 after that. I'd rather drive an extra hour looping north or west than go near Liberty's Marsh after midnight. Some nights, though, even at home, I hear it, dripping. Not rain. Just steady water patting against the siding, even when the sky is clear. And sometimes I'll wake to find streaks on the window sliding down slow, leaving no footprints, no trail. Just the smell of wet moss and bayou air hanging thick in the room, as if something had been standing just outside waiting for me to look. FM 118 cuts through the desert like a scar nobody bothers to stitch. A cracked two-lane that winds between Study Butte and Terlingua, where the scrub brush clings to life in the dust and the night air turns sharp against your skin. I've driven that stretch more times than I can count, usually after late shifts at the lodge, and it has always felt lonelier than any other piece of Texas highway. The desert out there has a way of swallowing sound. No crickets, no coyotes, no passing cars, just the low hum of your tires on asphalt and the darkness pressed in around your headlights. There's one mile marker in particular, marker 74, that I came to dread without ever meaning to. That's where the stories always start, the kind whispered around folding tables at Terlingua cook-offs or passed between mechanics, in Study Butte when business is slow. People call him the last cyclist. They say he appears just after sundown, caught in the glare of your headlights, pedaling slow and steady on a bike that looks too rusted to move. They say he has no eyes, just sockets that reflect your beams like a predator's, and if you see him once, you'll see him again and again, always at the same spot, always riding until he vanishes into thin air. The first time I saw him, it was late October, the desert cooling fast after a day that had baked everything at 100 degrees. I was heading home from Alpine, road-tired and strung out on gas station coffee, keeping my eyes fixed ahead because out here, you learn real quick not to trust your mind in the periphery. At first, it looked like a shimmer on the road the way heat waves bend light even after the sun's gone. I slowed a little, thinking maybe it was a stray dog or a drifter on foot, but then the shape resolved into a man on a bicycle. He wore old denim cutoffs, a white shirt yellowed with sweat, and his legs pumped the pedals in an easy rhythm. I would have sworn I heard the faint squeak of the chain over my own engine. The problem was he wasn't throwing a shadow. My brights should have cast him long and sharp across the road, but the ground behind him was clean. My chest tightened, breath caught halfway. I blinked, thinking I was nodding off, but when my eyes opened again, he turned his head just enough for me to see. Where his eyes should have been, two glossy hollows burned back the light. Not glowing, not shining, just wrong. Like my headlights had fallen into pits that swallowed and spit them back. I jerked the wheel instinctively, and when I looked again, the road was empty. No bike, no man. Nothing but the little green sign of mile marker 74 flashing by as if it had always been just another piece of desert night. I didn't tell anyone right away. Out here, folks drink hard and talk harder, and if you mention something that sounds like a ghost story, it'll follow you longer than your own name. But the second time it happened, a week later, I started to wonder if keeping it to myself was worse. This time he was closer. So close I thought my bumper might clip his back wheel. I swerved into the opposite lane to avoid him, and in my mirror, I watched him keep pedaling steady, unhurried until he blurred and faded into the blackness behind. My heart slammed so hard it rattled my ribs. I pulled over past the marker, cut my lights, and sat there with sweat cooling on my neck, staring back into the void. Nothing moved, not even the wind. The silence out there is its own kind of curse. It wasn't long before I started hearing the locals mention him more often. A ranch hand at the bar said he'd seen the cyclist last summer, same mile marker, same vanishing act. A woman who ran a gift shop swore her cousin wrecked his truck trying to avoid the figure, flipped twice, crawled out alive but wouldn't drive FM 118 again if you paid him. The stories tangled together, each detail reinforcing the others. Always a bike. Always the hollow eyes. Always mile 74. Some said he was a miner who got heatstroke biking home from work. Others swore he'd been a runaway caught in a hit and run, left to die with his bike twisted beside him in the ditch. Nobody knew for sure, and nobody went looking for the proof. But I couldn't leave it alone. The third time I saw him, I rolled down my window, half mad enough to call out. My voice sounded thin in the open air. He didn't slow, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all. I could have reached out and grabbed the back of his shirt. That's how close he was. But the air around him felt cold. Colder than desert air has any right to feel. My headlights washed over his shoulders and the skin there looked wrong, like paper rubbed too thin. When he vanished again at the mile marker, the chill lingered inside the cab, as if he'd dragged it in with him. I drove the rest of the way home with my windows sealed tight and the radio turned up so loud it shook the dashboard. After that, the cyclist started to haunt my drives like clockwork. Every time I passed 74 at night, there he was, pedaling, into existence just ahead of my hood, disappearing the second the green sign flicked past. Sometimes he was nearer the center of the lane, sometimes hugging the shoulder, but always the same hollow stare if I caught a glimpse of his face. I tried, taking other routes, longer ones through Presidio or up toward Alpine, but life doesn't always let you choose the long way around. When work called late, FM 118 was the only road, and every damn time, he was waiting. I began to notice things changing after the 6th or 7th encounter. My truck started to smell faintly of rust whenever I passed the mile marker. Once, when I pulled over immediately after he vanished, I found a thin line of grit on the passenger seat as if bike tires had shed it there. I hadn't carried anyone in weeks. I swept it clean, but the next time it was back, darker and damp, smelling faintly of iron. My dreams filled with the rhythmic creak of pedals and the flicker of headlight beams bouncing off empty sockets. I'd wake with my hands clenched so tight my nails left crescents in my palms. One night, curiosity, or maybe something heavier, got the better of me. I parked just before the marker, cut the engine, and waited with nothing but the desert and the hum of cicadas for company. At R. First, nothing happened. Then, faint but growing, came the squeal of a rusty chain. My skin broke out in gooseflesh. Out of the dark, without headlights to catch him, the cyclist materialized, pedaling past as if lit from nowhere. His wheels didn't touch the asphalt. They hovered an inch above, spinning with impossible weight. I wanted to reach for my phone, to capture something, anything. But when his head turned toward me, the sockets seemed bottomless, pulling at my vision, making my stomach lurch as if I'd stepped off a ledge. He slowed at the marker, stopped, and for the first time didn't vanish. Instead, he dismounted, the bike clattering silently as if it had no weight. He stood, staring, though staring isn't the word when there are no eyes to stare with. My throat closed. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to flee, to get the hell off that road. But my body wouldn't move. When he finally did, it was worse than anything. He lifted one hand, bony fingers flexing, and pointed at my truck. Not a wave, not a gesture for help, just a command. Then he was gone, evaporating like dust in wind, leaving nothing but the smell of metal and the faint hiss of tires that had never touched ground. I slammed the ignition and tore out of there, gravel spitting under my wheels, heart battering itself against my ribs. Since then, I haven't been the same. Sometimes, when I pass marker 74, he doesn't appear. The absence is worse. Because now I don't know when he'll come. The silence feels loaded, heavy with the promise that he's watching from just outside the reach of my lights, waiting for me to falter. Other times I catch glimpses in town, reflections in storefront, windows, a figure standing beside a bike in the shimmer of heat, always gone when I look twice. Folks still talk about the last cyclist like it's just another desert legend, something to scare tourists or amuse the drunks. But I know better. Whatever rides that stretch of FM 118 isn't a story. It's real. It's patient. And one night when my headlights catch those empty sockets again, I think he won't just vanish at the mile marker. I think he'll finally climb into the cab and ride the rest of the road with me. Highway 380 has always felt like a road built for ghosts. It runs flat and straight through the North Texas dark, fields and mesquite scrub on either side, power lines ticking by like a slow metronome. There's no softness to it, just black, asphalt stretched taut under the sky, where the stars seem close enough to scrape the roof of your truck if you dared to stand on the hood. I was driving it late one night, sometime past midnight, headed east toward Denton after finishing up a job in Decatur. The air was heavy, that kind of sticky Texas night where your windshield fogs if you crack the window, and the FM stations go static after 10 miles. My headlights carved two pale rivers into the dark, and the only sound was the low drone of tires rolling. That's when I saw him, a figure standing just off the shoulder, arm raised, thumb out. He was thin, gaunt almost to the point of skeletal, but not in that way you'd expect from some drifter on the side of the road. He wore a suit jacket too big for him, shiny, and the beams of my headlights and his eyes. Well, I'll get to his eyes. What got me to slow down was that strange pull you feel when you see another human out there alone, miles from anywhere. I let off the gas, the old Chevy rattling down as I pulled to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. He stepped forward, head dipping in something like gratitude, though his mouth never smiled. When he slid into the passenger seat, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Not foul, not like rot or anything you'd expect from a ghost story, but old. Like a trunk in the attic, cedar gone dry, and paper that's yellowed from too many summers. He closed the door softly, almost careful, and folded his hands in his lap like a child taught strict manners. "Appreciate it," he said. His voice was low, flat, like someone reading words they hadn't written themselves. I nodded, dropped the truck back into gear, and eased onto the highway. For a minute or two we rode in silence. The only light was from the dashboard glow, painting his skin a pale green. That's when I noticed his eyes. Hollow. Not empty sockets, not bloody holes like something from a cheap horror flick, but recessed, shadowed, so dark it was like looking into the end of a tunnel where no light could reach. He glanced at me, once just enough for me to catch the depth of that shadow, then turned his face back to the glass where the road slid by in streaks of silver. "You headed east?" he asked, and the way he said it made me realize he wasn't asking for Denton, wasn't asking for Dallas or any town you'd see on a sign, just east, as if the direction mattered more than the destination. I told him, yeah, that I was Denton bound, and he nodded like that was good enough. He shifted slightly in the seat, jacket crinkling, and for a moment I thought I saw something move beneath his collar, like a shadow slipping along his throat. But then he leaned back, hands folded again, and it was gone. I tried small talk. You do that when you've got a stranger in your truck, especially when the silence feels like it's pressing in. I asked if he'd been out here long, if he needed to get into town, if he had family waiting. He answered, but never more than a word or two. Long enough. Town'll do. Family's waiting. Each response was clipped like he was carving the words out with a dull knife. But it was his last answer that chilled me. I asked if he was from around here, and he tilted his head toward me, hollow eyes catching just a trace of dashboard glow, and said, "I'm from before." The truck seemed louder after that, like the engine was straining against silence. I gripped the wheel tighter, tried not to look at him. My skin itched with the wrongness of it, the way you feel when someone's standing too close in an empty room. He kept talking, though, in a voice that slid low and steady, telling me things that made less sense the longer I listened, about roads that don't end, about lights that follow but never arrive, about a name he couldn't remember but swore had been carved into stone. His words spilled like dry leaves, brittle and weightless, and yet the air in the cab grew heavier. Glanced over, ready to cut him off. Maybe make up an excuse about dropping him at the next gas station, but the seat was empty. Just like that. No door slam, no weight shift, no cold gust of night air. He was gone mid-sentence, his voice snuffed out as if it had never been there. The passenger seat, though, still had the impression of his body, pressed into it. Fabric dented, cushions sagged, and it radiated warmth like someone had just been sitting there. My knuckles locked white on the steering wheel. I didn't stop, I didn't check the road behind me. I just drove faster than I should have, until the first glow of Denton's sodium lights broke the horizon. Even then, even pulling into the safety of street lamps and late-night gas stations, the warmth lingered. The seat stayed pressed like some weight still sat beside me, unseen but unwilling to leave. When I finally parked outside my apartment, I swore I felt that warmth bleed against my arm, the faint pressure of a shoulder leaning close. I left the truck unlocked that night. Couldn't bring myself to sit back inside with whatever trace still hung there. When I went out the next morning, the seat had sprung back, cushion firm, as if no one had ever touched it. But the smell of old cedar and dry paper lingered for weeks, and sometimes when I drive Highway 380 at night, I catch myself glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see a gaunt man with hollow eyes, waiting for another ride east. And when the dashboard lights flicker just for a second, I swear I hear his voice finishing that cut-off sentence. FM 2222 winds out of Austin like a serpent, curling through limestone ridges and cedar breaks, the kind of road that makes you feel cut off from the rest of the world once the city lights vanish behind you. I never liked driving it after dark. The hills swallow sound, the dips in the road are blacker than pitch, and your headlights never seem to throw enough light to assure you of what lies ahead. That night I was heading home late from a friend's place off Loop 360, pushing into the hills around 11 when I saw the stains again. They looked darker than the road, like oil had seeped through the asphalt in crooked streaks, spreading out from the four corners where the county road met 2222. I'd seen them before, usually faint, blending into the tar patches. But that night, under my beams, they looked fresh, wet even. I slowed without meaning to, the wheel heavy in my hands, and my pulse started kicking hard like I'd hit cold water. Locals always called it the blood-stained crossroad. I'd heard the stories plenty of times. In the 70s, some fringe sect set up a compound in the hills, back before the land got bought out and parceled to developers. Rumors swirled that they'd sacrificed animals and maybe people right there at that intersection, painting symbols across the blacktop with blood before setting bonfires in the brush. Deputies came and went, but never caught anyone in the act. Only charred pits and bones scattered through the Kalishi. Then one summer night, a carload of kids wrecked there, the whole stretch soaked in blood after the collision, and when the wreck was cleared, the stains never went away. The county paved over it 3 times since then, but the marks always bled back through. Ask anyone in Austin who's lived there long enough, they'll tell you the same. Some swear headlights falter when you hit the junction, and if you stop, the air turns cold enough to frost. That night, my dash lights flickered when I rolled into the crossroad. Not a quick blip either, but a steady dimming like someone had reached over and thumbed the knob down. My beams cut short, the edge of the road shrinking until I could barely make out the yellow line. My first thought was electrical trouble, maybe a short in the alternator, but the timing rattled me too much to pass it off. The stains gleamed like tar in a fresh rain, only it hadn't rained in weeks. Central Texas was dry as bone, the cedar dust choking the air. I swear I saw them glisten, slick red under my beams, and for a second it looked like they weren't on the road at all, but seeping up from beneath, as if something below was pressing against the asphalt and bleeding through. I eased the truck forward, telling myself I was tired, maybe had too many beers at Eric's. But my hands were locked on the wheel and my skin prickled with gooseflesh. The road dropped into a hollow past the junction, the shadows pooling thick, and I kept watching my mirrors. That was when I saw the figures. At first just hints, reflections where there should have been nothing. Silhouettes standing at the corners of the crossroad, too many to count, blurry in the mirror. But when I turned my head, the road was empty. My heart banged against my ribs hard enough I thought it might split, but I kept driving, trying not to glance again. Then a whisper seeped through the cab, low and overlapping like a dozen voices underwater. I jerked the radio knob thinking maybe it had picked up static from a station, but the radio was off. The whispering didn't stop. It came from behind me, from the bed of the truck. I didn't dare stop. I gunned it down the next grade, tires buzzing against the pavement. My lights pulsed brighter, then dimmed again, and for a heartbeat I drove, blind. When they came back, I saw handprints smeared on the inside of my windshield. Red, streaked across the glass like something had pressed forward from the hood and dragged bloody palms across the interior. I shouted without meaning to, swerved nearly into the ditch, and then they were gone, leaving only faint, greasy outlines. My lungs heaved like I'd run a mile uphill. I drove that road 100 times before and after, but nothing like that night ever hit me again. Still, I can't explain it away. I checked the glass the next morning, and there were faint marks, like dried rust, curled fingers etched where there shouldn't have been anything at all. People in Austin talk about the hills like they're haunted by old spirits, Spanish settlers, Comanche raids, miners lost in shafts. But I think something darker took root in those limestone ridges, something that feeds on blood spilled on the rocks and won't let it go. The stains on that crossroad are proof enough. No amount of asphalt or sealant keeps them buried. They come back, and they glisten under your beams when the night is right. I try not to drive FM 22222 after dark anymore, not because I'm afraid of wrecks or deer crossing. It's because every time I hit that crossroad, I feel the weight of eyes on me, and I know if I ever stop there, really stop, those stains will spread wider, and I'll never leave that hollow again. I rented the upstairs room above an old feed store because it was cheap and because it was halfway between where I was and where I thought I might be going. The place smelled like dust and burlap, the kind of dry air that clings to your tongue and makes you feel like you haven't had water in days. The landlord gave me a brass key attached to a round wooden tag with the number 2 burned into it and told me the bathroom was down the hall, past the narrow window that looked over County Road 17. I dragged my duffel in and set it on the quilted bedspread. The quilt had a pattern of faded blue squares, the color worn away at the edges where hands must have smoothed it again and again. The floorboards were old pine, hard and loud, and when you walked you could feel the boards give a hair under your weight as if the house were breathing with you. I should have kept driving that night. I knew that. There was a front moving in from the coast and the radio said there would be fog and drizzle past midnight, maybe worse if it stalled. I told myself I was being smart, that the room and the shower would buy me rest, but really I didn't want to be out on an empty road with nothing but my thoughts. I used to be good at keeping thoughts in order. Lately they were like crows on a fence line. One would settle, another would flap up and go, and you never really knew which one was yours. There was a chair by the window and a little table with a Bible that had been opened and closed so many times the leather had softened to suede. I took a shower, listening to pipes clang in the walls like someone knocking to be let in, then sat by the window with a paper cup of water from the sink and watched the road go dark. The store below me had a hand-painted sign reading, Harper Feed and Supply. The H was flaked away and the R looked like a K. There were no cars on the road. The one street lamp at the corner glowed a weak yellow. In the morning there would be pickups with stock racks and men in caps carrying bags of feed on their shoulders. But at night, the town felt like a stage after the play, with the chairs stacked and the lights left low. I brought my notebook out of habit. I haven't written much of anything worth saving in years, but the notebook still comes with me. The cover was creased. The elastic band had lost its snap and hung loose like a tired mouth. I put it on the table and didn't open it. I didn't want to see the pages where I had tried to make sense of the thing that happened to my sister when we were kids. We were not talking about it then, and we were not talking about it now. I had come this way because I thought the road would wear the edges off the memory. The road only polished it. Around 11, the fog came in low. You could see it touch the street lamp and turn the light to milk. I stood and put my palm against the cool glass. My breath clouded a little circle, and in that circle I saw someone cross the street. A small figure. A girl in a light dress that moved around her knees. She was carrying something to her chest. It was a doll. The doll's head dangled on a thread and bounced against her wrist as she walked. She stopped in the middle of the road and turned like she was looking for an address. When she turned toward the store, I saw her smile. I have told myself since that there was nothing wrong with the smile. It was a smile the way a photograph is a smile. Too much teeth, too steady. My body did something before my mind could catch up. I stepped back and knocked over the paper cup. Water ran toward the edge of the table and dripped onto the floorboards. I heard it patter, and then I heard the steps on the stairs. The stairs had a slow, patient rhythm, the kind of rhythm that knows it will arrive. I told myself I was not going to be the kind of man who called the police because a child walked in. The fog. I told myself maybe she was staying in one of the other rooms, or maybe she lived nearby and liked to wander at night. Though what kind of home lets a little girl out at this hour, I did not want to imagine. I stood in the middle of the room and felt my heart push against my ribs. The footsteps reached the landing. They paused. A tiny tapping came from the hall. It was a light plastic sound like a toy striking a wall. The doorknob moved. I saw it turn a fraction and stop. I did not say, "Come in." I did not say anything. The knob turned again, slow this time, like whoever held it had never worked such a thing and was copying a motion they had only watched. The door opened an inch and held there. The air coming in was colder than the room. It smelled like ditch water and leaves. After a beat, the door opened another few inches. I could see the hallway, which was narrow with maroon paint along the bottom half of the wall and cream paint up top. I could see the pale oval of a face beyond the frame. The girl stood there smiling, and the doll hung from her hand and tapped the trim every time she breathed. I said hello before I realized I was going to. She stared at my mouth, still smiling, and didn't answer. I felt foolish addressing a child like she was a stray dog, which is what my voice did without my consent. I said easy. I said, "Where do you live?" The doll tapped the trim. Tap, tap, tap. She lifted the doll and held it up like she was presenting a prize. The head turned on the last threads. One glass eye stared at my chin. The other socket was empty, and the hole was dark. The hall light went out. The bulb must have been old. When the filament breaks, there is a sound not quite like a pop, more like the click of a tongue against teeth. The hall fell to the dim wash of the street lamp, and the girl did not move. She held the doll up and then drew it to her chest and smoothed its hair with the palm of her hand like it had cried and she was comforting it. I said, "I'm going to shut the door now, okay?" And I put my hand on the edge and pushed, gentle, because she was still there. The door came forward and met her palm. I did not see her lift it, but I felt the pressure of a hand against the wood. Not a child's hand. The strength of it stopped me like I had pressed against the corner of a wall. She tilted her head like she was curious and smiled wider, and I saw that her teeth were not wrong in number or shape. There were just too many of them showing for the shape of her mouth. I have been afraid plenty of times in my life. I have been afraid of bank letters and of calls at midnight and of the smell of smoke when there should be no smoke. I have not been afraid like I was in that moment. It was not the kind of fear that makes you run. It was the kind that makes you learn things. I learned the hollow behind my heart where breath is supposed to live. I learned the sound of the building's ribs. I learned that everything has a cost, even when you don't know the price yet. I said, "I'm going to call your parents." The hand let go. The pressure eased. The door swung shut as if there had never been anything keeping it from doing so. The latch did not catch. The door stayed a hair open, and the maroon stripe of the hallway glowed in the gap. I went to the table and picked up the Bible because it was the only thing that felt dense enough to hold. I had never done anything like that in my life. I am not a man who walks around with talismans. That night I needed weight in my hands. The tapping began again. It moved along the baseboard from the door to the corner, and then back. It was slow, at first, and then faster, as if the doll were being dragged back and forth by its ankles. I said, "Please stop." It stopped. Silence went so hard in the room I heard the settling dust. My pulse ticked at the hinge of my jaw. From downstairs, a door slammed. The sound rose through the building like a shout. A second later, the landlord called up that the front door had blown open and was banging, so if I could put the chain on from the inside, that would be helpful. I stood with the Bible pressed to my chest and could not find my voice. He swore softly and the front door slammed again and the chain rasped in place. His footsteps moved across the concrete and the light in the hall blinked once, twice, and came back. When the light returned, the gap at my door showed nothing but pale paint. I counted to 30 and put my hand out. The door moved easy. The hallway was empty. On the floor, there was a wet mark in the shape of a small foot. The print was not clear. It was smudged at the toes and the heel, as if the foot that made it had no weight and only the water did. I watched as the shape thinned at the edges and went to shine. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair with the Bible open across my knees to a page that did not speak to me. The fog tucked the lamp outside and deeper until it went away entirely. Sometime after 2, I heard the stairs again. The rhythm was the same, slow, patient. I stood before the knock. It came as a polite tap, as if by someone taught to ask permission. I considered the fact that I could take the chair and wedge it under the knob. I considered the fact that the chair would not matter. I opened the door and there was the girl again, closer this time. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Her eyes did not look like anything I knew. They were the color of deep puddles. For a second I saw my own reflection in them and did not like what I looked like. The doll hung from her hand and something stirred beneath the loosened scalp as if a moth had been trapped under the skin. She said hello finally, in a voice like the first squeak of a door that has not been opened in a long time. I told her hello back and asked her name. She said it in a rush, and I could not catch it. I asked again, and she said May. She did not say if that was her name or the month. I said, "Do you live here?" And she nodded, and then she shook her head like she had been taught to do both and never learned which one applied. The doll's head slipped another thread and twisted, and the good glass eye turned toward me and held, and I felt the same patient strength I had felt through the wood of the door. I told her I would walk her to wherever she needed to go. The hall felt longer now. It smelled like pine and wet earth. She stepped back and waited for me to come out, as if she could not turn away from the door so long as I stood behind it. I did not like the thought that there were rules I did not know. I did not like the thought that I had already broken some. Downstairs, the store was dark. The landlord had a cot by the back room and a small radio playing a weather station. I could hear the announcer naming towns and wind speeds in a voice that never changed. The front door was chained and the windows gave back only my shadow and the low red blink of the soda machine light. The girl walked on bare feet and left marks that shone and then faded. She glanced up at the soda machine and smiled wider, as if the red light told a joke meant only for her. We went out the side door into the alley. The fog held to the railings and the brick like a body holds to clothes after rain. She led me to the end of the alley and into the street. There was no sound, not a dog, not a car. The town was a mouth, holding its breath again. She looked both ways without moving her head and then stepped off the curb. I followed because I had said I would, and because I did not know what else to do. She went to the far side and stopped exactly in the middle of the crosswalk where the paint was more ghost than line. She turned to me and raised the doll and held it between us so that its loose head hung in the air like a pale fruit. She said, "Do you want to see my room?" I said, "Not tonight." I said it like a father might have said it, soft but firm and expecting obedience. She nodded, and then she smiled so wide the corners of her mouth trembled, and I saw that the skin there had a fine, white line like a scar. She handed me the doll. The weight of it surprised me. It felt heavy with water. A smell came off it like pond scum and old cloth. I swallowed and held it away from my shirt, and for a second the head swung and the glass eye caught a smear of light and threw it back at me like a signal. The girl stepped backward into the fog and kept stepping until she reached the opposite curb again, which did not make sense. She lifted her hand like you do when you are far away and know your voice will not carry. I lifted mine because I am a polite man even when I am terrified. Then she turned and walked into the fog until there was no shape left to her at all. I stood there holding the doll while the fog closed in around my wrists. After a minute, I understood that the doll was not meant to be kept. It was meant to be returned. I crossed back to the alley and went up the stairs, not looking behind me. In the hall, the light burned steady and my door stood open an inch the way I had left it. I put the doll on the floor just outside the threshold and pushed it across the wood with the edge of my shoe until it lay with its face to the trim, the remaining eye to the wall. Then I closed the door and locked it and put the chair under the knob because I am not as brave as the man I tell myself I am. In the morning, the landlord knocked and called up that coffee was hot. I opened the door and looked down. The doll was gone. The wood was dry. There was a smear where the face had been like a slug had crossed there and decided the paint did not suit it. I went downstairs and stood by the back door while the landlord poured coffee into a foam cup. He said, "You see her then?" And I did not answer. He said some do, some don't. He said she walks when the fog comes inland. Said she used to live in a house where the county put the bypass and they moved the house on a truck and someone forgot to move her. I smiled because I did not want to spill the cup and he looked at my hands and nodded like he could smell the ditch water on them. I left that morning with the road shining under tires and the sun trying to burn its way through. I told myself I would not take County Road 17 again. I told myself I would not rent the room above the feed store again. And then I told myself that what we tell ourselves is not a promise, but a hope. The radio named towns and wind speeds. I held the wheel and kept my eyes on the center line. At the first turn, I saw a small shape on the shoulder and my foot went to the brake. It was only a grocery bag torn and caught in a sumac. The bag lifted and smiled in the wind. I did not. I kept going, and all the way to the junction, the air in the cab of the truck had the faint, dark sweetness of pond water. And once when I checked the mirror, I swore I saw a small, damp handprint fog the glass. Then clear the way. Breath clears when the mouth that made it is gone. I didn't believe the stories about the vanished exit on I-45 when I first heard them. Around here, folks pass around road talk the way they pass around thermoses, always topped off, always a little stronger than you expect. I work for a vending company out of Conroe, refilling snack machines in schools and hospitals up through Madisonville and back into Houston. My Thursdays usually run late because I hit the ISD buildings after the kids clear out. It's nothing glamorous. A white box truck that rattles in crosswinds, a hand truck that likes to bite your shins, and a clipboard with routes I could drive in my sleep. I know where the potholes bloom after hard rain, and which stations on the FM band cut in with Tejano, near New Waverly. I know the red glow you get off the Huntsville unit at night, and how Big Sam, the giant statue of Sam Houston, greets you like a concrete ghost from the median when you come over a rise southbound. I know the squeal of cicadas in the summer and how it dies out as you climb toward the pine stands that hem in the divided lanes. I know the smell of that resinous heat and the way night compresses along that stretch so it feels like someone closing their hand around your head. The first time the exit came up, I was at the Loves Off 45 and 30, where the truckers cluster, and the coffee tastes like burnt walnuts. Two older guys at the counter were telling the cashier about a driver who took an exit he swore he'd never seen before. County Road something, service route, sounded official, and came back to the interstate with his tank bone dry like he'd driven to El Paso and back. They were laughing about it, not unkindly, the way folks laugh when they're trying to peel fear off something by touching it too much. The cashier nodded along and never made eye contact with either of them. I remember that because I thought, she knew a story she wasn't going to tell. That was a month before my night. On the day it happened, I ran a little long at a high school in Madison County. It was a Thursday in late October, cool enough to keep your windows down without sweating. The air startlingly clear after a line of storms had cleared out by noon. I'd planned to be on 45 by 9. Instead, I had a jammed candy coil that didn't want to cough up a Snickers and an assistant principal who thought I could fix the Pepsi machine in the faculty lounge even though we don't touch soda. By the time I loaded the dolly back into the truck and signed my last sheet, the stadium lights across the street were blazing, and the marching band was banging through warm-ups. Friday night football happens on Thursdays sometimes now, TV schedules, and whatnot. I caught a bit of the announcer's voice drifting over the parking lot while I tied the rear latch. When I climbed into the cab, the clock on the dash said 9:52. I had a 3/4 tank and a Buc-ee's sausage wrap I'd been saving. The road south was black and uncomplicated. The kind of night that makes you feel like you could drive forever. The first hour went how it always goes. I passed a prison bus heading north with its running lights low. Somewhere around Badias Road, the radio bled into static and Spanish, then back again. Semis glided by like slow stars. Now and then a coyote yipped beyond the tree line and got swallowed by the roar of tires. I hummed along to Old Country, checked the rear view, counted green overhead signs like rosary beads to keep my brain occupied. I don't text while I drive, and anyway, reception goes weird through the thicker patches of Sam Houston National Forest. I remember cresting a gentle rise and seeing the faint white halo of Big Sam to the south. The statue always looks like it's walking toward you at night if you let your eyes ask the wrong questions. Then I remember seeing a sign I had never seen before. County Road 14, service route. The font, the reflectivity, the way it sat on its post, it all looked right. No graffiti, no bullet dings. It was the same green as every legitimate promise of an exit you'll ever meet on a Texas interstate. I lifted my foot off the gas, glad for any chance to break the rhythm and stretch. The arrow angled right. I signaled, checked my mirror, drifted into the lane. The ramp opened like a mouth down into a darker place under the trees. Right then my low fuel light dinged. It made no sense. I'd had over half a tank 20 minutes earlier. I told myself sensors get finicky with age, that maybe the slosh of the road fooled the float. The ding sounded again anyway, a nag more than an alarm. I figured I'd take the service road, find a little non-chain station, maybe one with a faded Coke mural and a Texas lottery decal on the glass, pump $10 to quiet the light, and get back on 45. I eased down the ramp and the world changed like someone was dimming a theater. The constant white noise of the interstate shrank to a faraway whisper. The pavement under my tires felt different, new and slick, and my headlights showed perfect lane paint with edges too crisp to be real. The pine stands leaned in, high and tight. I couldn't see the interstate anymore in my mirrors. The ramp kept descending longer than any ramp had a right to. There were no reflectors on the sides, no rumble strips, no signs telling me the name of the county road I was about to meet, which is the first thing that bothered me, because even Texas backroads like to introduce themselves with a little pride. The ramp fed into a two-lane that looked like it had been poured last week and sealed yesterday. The fog crept in on the ground in flat sheets. I rolled the window up without thinking. The cicadas quit, like someone had pulled a plug. What replaced them was an emptier sound, that hollow, high-ceiling quiet you get inside big, empty buildings where your shoes echo. I glanced at the clock. It said 10:38. The radio fumbled into a Phil Collins song and then went dead on the chorus like somebody cut the wire. I laughed once at how dumb that made me feel, and the laugh sounded too loud. Followed the road because that was the only thing there was to do. It had a sweep to it like a farm to market, wide enough to take with a long trailer. But the trees on both sides didn't belong next to a road that new. They were old as courthouse benches, long vertical black bars lashed together overhead. In the fog, my high beams just made a white wall, so I kept them low and took it easy. After a mile or two, I saw a sign and felt relief in my chest like oxygen. The sign was wooden, though, not metal, and the paint on it had bleached to chalk. I slowed and tugged over a little to read it. It said, as far as I could make out, M, RCH, town. The letters between were scabbed off by weather. Beneath the name, the population number was faint. It ended in a 2. My brain filled in Marchertown because it had to fill in something or throw a rod. Just beyond the sign, I passed a little turnoff. The fog moved like breath across it. There was a fence, gray with age, running back into the woods and a cattle guard across the mouth of the drive. The bar ends of the guard had rust on them. The fence held a hand-painted warning that had flaked down to blank wood. Past it, I thought I saw the corner of a low building like a ranch house, and a porch light bloomed as I went by it, weak and yellow. It went dark again in my mirror. I don't scare easy, years of late nights and weird janitor keys, but something about that light turning on to acknowledge my passing crept under my skin. The low fuel light blinked again and stayed. The needle dropped like it had been cut, loose from its mooring. The engine note didn't change. The truck didn't sputter or knock, but the gauge told a different story. I took the next curve slower. Then I saw another sign, new green this time, tall and thin, fresh reflective sheen, arrow pointing left. Service route access, it said, then an alphanumeric with letters that didn't match any Texas highway style I've ever seen. I turned because the idea of staying on a nameless two-lane into fog had started to feel like agreeing to a dare. The access road ran straighter, and after a short stretch I saw exactly what I'd been hoping to see, a gas station. It was set back from the road with a gravel lot and two older-style pumps under a low tin canopy. No brand, no bright lights. Just a hum from an old fluorescent above the door and a bug cloud so dense it looked like smoke in the damp air. The building itself was cinder block painted white sometime in the last century. A Coke machine sat against the wall with a faded red face, the kind with a price window and a paddle. An old man's shape stood inside behind the cloudy glass of the door. My relief came bottled with embarrassment at how hard it hit. I coasted in. The gravel under the tires sounded wrong, too dry and crisp, like I was driving on clean bone. I turned the engine off to be safe. The clock read 11:21 now. I hadn't felt that much time pass. I stepped out and the air hit me cold enough to sting my teeth. I zipped my jacket just to pretend I was normal, took my wallet, and walked up to the pump. I looked for the card slot and found none. The pump had a rolling mechanical counter and a metal lever on the side. There was a placard that said, "Please pay inside before pumping." I looked toward the door. The man inside hadn't moved. He did when I reached for the handle. He took a half step back, like folks do when they're making room to open for you. The door stuck and then gave with a long rubbery peel like paint tearing off tape. The bell over it dinged. The old man was older than I'd pegged. His hair had that paper texture you see on TV preachers who won't retire. Very white and very thin. He wore a long-sleeved work shirt, buttoned wrong, and a name patch that had lost whatever name it used to show. His eyes were the unsettling part. Not milky, not blind. Just fixed on my chest like I was a yard sign he was reading at a distance. "Evenin'," I said. "Can I put 30 on number 1? I held up my card and then immediately felt dumb for doing that because this place had never heard of cards. He didn't look at what I held. He looked through. He lifted one hand and put it down on a metal box by the register that belonged in a museum. "We don't do advance here," he said, slow and clear, East Texas syrup laid over something flatter. "You pull what you need, we'll settle when you're done." "I'm running low," I said, trying to keep the conversation human. "Where does this tie back into 45 from here?" His mouth twitched like he wanted to smile or needed to remember how. "You'll see it," he said. "We get travelers." The word hit me funny. Travelers sounded like a title, not a description. The bug hum out front got louder, a real vibration in the bones. The fluorescent above us flickered and then steadied. There was no cold case humming, no radio behind the counter, no smell of coffee. The air inside the station smelled like wet cardboard. On the wall behind him hung a white pegboard with some belts and hoses you might convince yourself could fit your engine in a pinch. Every package on that wall looked 30 years old. I asked about the restroom because that's what people ask, and he shook his head once, polite but firm. I went back out. The fog had thickened into something that moved, in slow muscles. I threw the lever on the pump and took down the handle. The nozzle was heavier than it should have been, the rubber starting to check. I slid it into the tank and squeezed the trigger. The numbers on the old counter rolled like a slot machine. I didn't hear the sound of fuel the way you do when it hits. I didn't smell gas. I told myself that modern tanks and old pumps make different feedback and that I was being a child, and I kept the lever squeezed. After a minute, the counter said I'd pulled 9 gallons. The gauge in the truck's dash climbed a hair and then shivered back down like a lie told and taken back. I felt a push of anger then at how weird the whole thing was. I set the nozzle in the cradle and walked back inside. 30 even, he said before I could tell him the amount. I didn't like that. Didn't like that he had the number ready when the counter outside had spun past any even number and back. I set down 2 20s on the counter. He put his hand over them and slid back one without looking what it was. "You'll see it," he said again, not to me so much as the air. Back at the truck, I cranked the engine. The needle wavered and parked on a hair above E. The light stayed on. The sound under the hood told a different story. The idle was steady as Sunday. I put it in drive, eased out of the lot, glanced in the mirror. The man had stepped out to the edge of the cinder block, hands at his sides, head tilted, like a dog, listening for a whistle. I took the access road straight because there were no other options. The gravel turned back to new blacktop in a step like crossing a county line. The fog crowded the glass. The trees puckered in closer and closer until the road felt like a hollowed log. I expected a T-junction or a loop. What I got was a curve that wouldn't quit. It went right and kept going, and when I thought it must surely break into straightaway or reveal a stop sign, it tightened. My hands wanted to correct, and the truck floated out a little on the slickness, then held. The clock said 12:02. The radio hissed like a living thing in a jar. My headlights picked out another green sign coming up, and I nearly laughed just to have something to aim at. Service route access. Arrow left this time. I took it because not taking it felt like defying a law of physics. The road changed. The paint was different. The fog fell away all at once and left a smell like burnt matches. Out of the right corner of my eye, I saw, for a heartbeat, the white shape of Big Sam standing not to the south where he belongs, but to the north, and much closer than any engineer would allow. I told myself that was impossible. I told myself a lot of things as I eased along, hands light on the wheel, eyes scanning for a familiar pair of overhead greens that would show me south toward Houston. Up ahead, something dark broke the line of the shoulder. Clothes, I thought. A jacket fallen from a pickup bed. Then it stood up. The beams caught a man, lean and wearing something that might have been a uniform in a different decade, gray and shapeless. He lifted one arm, not to hail me, not to warn, but to point into the trees on my left. He didn't look at me when I passed. He kept pointing the way a sign points. In the mirror, he was gone like he'd been part of the mist. I told myself the prison units out here have trustees who wander duties at night, and that if he had been real, he had vanished back into the brush the way deer do, in one soundless bound. The needle on the fuel gauge nicked the red stop. The truck didn't cough. The clock said 1:14. When I saw headlights ahead, I felt an animal surge of hope and hit my brights to make contact. Two white eyes slid toward me slow, too slow. The vehicle was an older sedan with a trunk lip higher than modern cars wear. It came to a polite halt on the opposite shoulder with no noise of gravel. Somebody inside it moved and then didn't. I passed and the window showed me myself for a half second, then turned black. No driver, no passenger. My rear view showed the car facing the other way than it had faced a heartbeat earlier, taillights fading without brightening or dimming. I pressed my tongue hard to the roof of my mouth so I wouldn't say anything out loud. I took the next curve and then another. The trees gave way to a clearing where the fog had gathered in a bowl. Out in the middle of the open space, a set of basketball goals stood without nets, the kind you see at a church rec lot, crooked and left to rust. A wind moved there that didn't move in the trees around it. The sound of a whistle blew once, far off, long and low, like a freight train calling in the pine dark. The sound wasn't from the direction of any rail line I know runs out here. It felt like it came from underneath. There was a third green sign with white lettering that I never could read, because the letters seemed to fade while I looked at them. I drove past it very slowly and tried to memorize the shape of the words. What I retained later was a feeling that the name on that sign had been familiar the way dreams are familiar, like a face I couldn't place from a school I never attended. The road rose then, a gentle ramp that I knew in my bones meant a rejoining to the interstate. I tasted relief like a chemical on my tongue. The fog thinned. The night looked normal again. The black, the right shade of black instead of the one that absorbs sound. I came up under a bridge with wide concrete spans and saw overhead the silver flash of tractor trailers streaking by like meteors. I merged, without checking my mirror because there had been no other cars for an hour, and because I wanted the big smooth known hum of 45 under me again, so badly my hands shook. The clock said 3:33. My fuel light stayed on, but the truck, stubborn to the end, purred at 70. I took a breath through my nose. A slow one, to calm my chest and to smell for gas in case something had ruptured. All I got was the damp pine smell and the faint leather stink of my work gloves on the bench seat. My phone buzzed on the passenger side. It had found a tower again and wanted me to know about 3 missed calls from my boss, time-stamped across the past hour and a half. The texts said, "Where are you? And everything good and you on 45. I didn't answer immediately. I stared over the wheel and let the white lines slice past like a film reel. A semi rolled by to my left and the bow wave rocked me in the lane like you get near Corsicana on a windy night. The driver gave me the little 2-finger wave truckers give each other. I waved back without lifting my hand from the wheel. There's a Buc-ee's in Madisonville that never sleeps. I pulled in there because I needed the comfort of fluorescent and baked sugar. I parked between family SUVs with bug-spattered grills and a guy in a camo cap sitting on his tailgate eating a kolache like a sacrament. The canopy lights made the world look sterile. I got out and the smell of gasoline there, the real sharp smell of modern fuel, nearly knocked me flat with how normal it was. I opened my tank cap and looked inside with my phone light. Dry. It made no sense at all with the way the engine had behaved. I put in $20 out of stubbornness and watched the number climb on a digital screen, clean and precise, and heard the liquid glug and settle. My needle swung up like a hand raised by a tide. Inside I bought coffee I didn't want and one of those barbecue sandwiches they shovel with a gloved hand. The kid at the register told me to have a good night, and his voice had the soft "from here, roll you can't fake." I sat for a minute at a table near the window and watched a state trooper lean against his cruiser and drink from a paper cup. I thought about walking out to him and telling him there was a station down a service road where the pump could make a fool of modern gauges. I pictured the way he would stop leaning. I pictured the way he would look at me. I stayed inside. When I got home to Conroe, the sun was still thinking about it. The birds in the little scrub oak by my mailbox were frantic with mourning. I went straight in and sat on the edge of the bed to take my boots off and left them standing where they fell. My phone chimed again. My boss wanted to know if I could swing by a hospital on 1960 that afternoon, because they were out of Fritos. I replied sure, like nothing had happened. It was easier to move forward than to explain where I'd been when I hadn't been anywhere that had a name. Sleep came and then didn't. Every time my brain walked me back down that ramp, my heart kicked like a mule and I'd jerk up and stare at the light on the ceiling fan. Around noon, I gave up and went out to the truck to look at it in daylight because that's what men do when something spooks them. We open hoods, we check belts, we lay hands on what we can control. The engine looked like it always looks, a smear of oily dust, a belt that would squeal on cold mornings and then decide it wanted to live after all. I pulled the dipstick. Normal. I crouched and looked under the tank. No wet, no drips. I smelled around the filler neck, the smell of last night's Buc-ee's. Fuel hung honest and sharp. Later that week, I drove that stretch again. You have to drive the same roads when you do what I do. There's no alternate route that keeps your insides out of your throat. It was a bright afternoon, Friday. School buses farted diesel and kids waved at nothing. The sky was so blue it looked false. I kept my eyes wider than necessary and told myself I wouldn't be tempted if I happened to see any impossible signage. I didn't see it. I saw lots of ordinary greens, exits I've used and ones I haven't. The usual parade of farm-to-market numbers and the comfort of knowing you can measure your life in certain intervals. But there was nothing that said County Road 14. No official arrowhead, no post bear where a sign used to be. I didn't take that corner of my eye toward the trees as much, because I didn't want to be the one to conjure anything by looking for it. A week after, at a hospital in Huntsville, a nurse with sleepless raccoon eyes asked me where I'd been the Thursday before because she had waited late thinking I was coming with the honey buns, and I never showed until 3 in the morning. She said it exactly like that. 3 in the morning, not 3:33, because why would she? I made a joke about the long line at Buc-ee's and how kolaches didn't pump themselves, and she laughed without finding it funny at all, as I rolled my dolly away. I passed a bulletin board in the corridor. On it was a flyer with dates and times and a little black and white picture of an older sedan with a trunk lip too high. The flyer asked if anyone had seen a car like that between midnight and 4 on any Thursday night and gave a Walker County number to call. I didn't call. I did something else I'm not proud of. I started keeping a 5-gallon can in the back of the truck, strapped to the side like a dumb talisman. I told myself it was practical. Storms take out stations. Lines happen. A man can run short. But the first night I drove with it, the truck made a new rattle back there that my brain learned to track instead of the road. It was like carrying a question in physical form. After a month of listening to it, I took it out and put it in the shed and felt better for the silence until the silence reminded me of the fog, and I put the can back. A friend of mine from church, Skip, works TDCJ and hears everything. We were eating brisket off paper at a fundraiser one Saturday when I told him a softized version of it, like I was talking about a dream I knew better than to believe in. He listened and didn't make a joke. He chewed and looked off toward nothing like he was reading a sign out there in the middle distance. You know how many roads cut through the forest out there that ain't on the books anymore, he said finally, after wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. You know how many got taken back by the trees? You can see the shape in winter if you know where to look, but they don't go where you think they do. What do you mean? I asked. Some of them don't end, he said, and then laughed like he'd gotten ahead of himself. Or if they do, they're on different days than they started. He looked at me proper then, seeing the way I was holding myself very still. Don't take any signage that isn't on the text.app, he said, a little lighter. That's my advice. I told him there had been a station. He took a long time answering that part. There are always stations, he said finally. Some of them sell what you got and take what you don't know you owe. Then he smiled, because we were at a fundraiser and nobody wants a haunted man handing them a plate. I've seen the exit again. That's the part I try not to talk about because it makes me feel cracked in public. It was raining hard, one of those sideways gulf storms that push all the cars under the overpass shoulders and make everyone in lifted trucks feel like kings. I'd pulled off to wait it out near New Waverly, and when it eased, I eased back. The road steamed. The tires hissed. The trees looked black enough to ring if you tapped them. I was running late again, of course, because that's the story of my working life. I saw the green flash ahead of the wiper's arc, the exact green my memory had saved. I didn't look hard. I didn't need to. My hands tightened on the wheel. The arrow pointed right. I kept left, glued to the worn groove of the southbound lane, like it was a priest's hand on my shoulder. The sign zipped out of view before my breath came back. I told myself my eyes had misread a perfectly normal county road. I told myself a lot. 2 miles down, my low fuel light dinged, stupid and bright. The needle fell a notch, then another, and then jittered like a dragonfly. My chest went cold and then hot. There's a shell near there I know, like my kitchen sink. I took that exit, the regular one. I filled up under the bright lights with my card and the little television in the pump telling me about high school, scores, and beltway construction. The rain hissed. The world smelled like gasoline and wet denim. My needle climbed like faith. I got back on the interstate, and the green signs came at me in their proper order. I passed the Sam Houston statue, and he stood where he should stand, watching southward with that faint sternness he wears. I drove on, and the radio played a song I knew all the words to, and for a while there was nothing strange at all about the night. I don't take new exits after 10 anymore. I plan my stops and I keep to them like an old man with pills. If a sign pops up that I don't remember, I treat it like a snake on the porch. Polite, cautious, not my problem. I don't tell the story much, and when I do, I sand off the parts that sound like I've traded my common sense for whispers. But some nights when the forest is pressed in and the fog lays low and the trucks move like a procession of steel cattle down the middle of the state, I feel the road flex a little under me, like a horse working its jaw against the bit. I'll pass a gap in the trees where a road used to be, where you can see the old fence line diving in, and I'll think about the way that old man looked through me, like he was checking to see if I was the kind that pays with bills or with time. The sound that comes back to me isn't the ding of the low fuel light or the rattle of my dolly. It's that one long whistle from nowhere, the kind you hear when a train goes through your dreams on tracks that were torn out decades ago. People disappear for hours in Texas all the time. They blame rain or traffic or family or the new Buc-ee's opening like a stadium and swallowing time. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's just the way a life runs in a wide state that loves its distances. But there's a place south of Madisonville and north of Huntsville where the green of a sign is a little too green and the paint on the lines a little too white. And if you follow it, you might come back with your tank empty and a number on your clock you didn't earn. You won't have miles to show for it. You won't have a map that explains it. You'll just have the memory of fog grabbing at your bumper in a store where the pumps roll without filling anything you can measure. And a voice that says, not unkindly, we get travelers. Like that's an answer and a warning both. And if you ever see Big Sam standing in the wrong direction, do yourself a favor. Do not stop to take a picture. Keep your hands steady on the wheel and your eyes fixed on the road you know, because some exits around here aren't for you, and the toll they charge isn't money.